All right, I'd like to call to order the Town of Corte Madera regular town council meeting for Tuesday, April 18th, 2023, starting at 6:30 p.m. So item number one, the call to order, and now the roll call.
Councilmember Casissa.
Here.
Councilmember Avazio.
Here.
Councilmember Thomas.
Here.
Vice Mayor Beckman.
Here.
And Mayor Lee.
Here. Can we salute and pledge the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item number two, open time for public comment. Any member of the public may address the town council concerning any item not on the council's agenda. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Unless otherwise specified by the mayor or presiding officer, the public will be given an opportunity to speak on each agenda item as the time is called. So anything not on the agenda, you can speak to. Is there any public currently that would like to speak to something not on the agenda? So you can stand up to the podium and you'll have 3 minutes. Seeing none, is there any online?
We have 11 attendees and none of them have their hands raised, and we don't have any emailed public comment.
Okay, so we'll close open time for public comment and move on to item number 3, which is presentations. Item 3A is the Central Marin Police Authority Annual Statistics Report to Council. A presentation will be provided by Michael Norton, Police Chief, and Hamid Khalili, Captain.
As you may or may not know, there's a municipal code in Corte Madera.
There's a municipal code in Corte Madera that requires that we basically deliver a report once a year on traffic statistics and traffic accidents. And I'm going to have our captain, Hamid Khalili, who oversees operations, including traffic, give that presentation this year. I will say, just before I bring him up real quick, I'm pretty actually happy with the statistics. I thought they would be with I shouldn't say with the number of accidents, but I'm happy with how we did this year based really just on our staffing. We've been having a bit of a staffing issue this year. And it goes back a couple of years, but we're kind of at the peak of it right now. We'll see how the statistics look when we get to the end of this year. But just to give you a real quick overview, we have 42 sworn positions. So those are police officers, and that includes me. I'm a sworn officer, so is the captain, but I don't drive the black and white car or the motorcycle and go around and do parking. So we have 42 of us. 10 of us are either like administrators like myself, or detectives, or on task force and things like that. That leaves us with 32 officers. And of those 32, those would be the ones who you basically see all the time. They're in uniform, they're doing traffic enforcement, arresting bad guys, all that good stuff. Of those 32 right now, we're basically have 11 spots that are not filled in one way or another. It doesn't mean they're not employees of us. They're just not able to go out there. We have 2 on workers' comp. We have 3 currently on our field training program. So they have several months left. We have 2 in the academy. So they won't be on the street for about 8 months, all going well. And then the rest of those are unfilled positions at this time. And I think there's 4 or 5. And those were in the process of trying to hire people. So best case scenario, those 5 spots we'd send to an academy in July, and they would be on their own in about a year after July. So I just want to give you some perspective on that. There's multiple reasons we're having these issues. It's really nationwide, statewide, countywide. And I think you're having some trouble here, even the town filling some town positions. And it's just something we're dealing with, and it is one of our big goal this year and next year is really for me to work closely with the 3 managers from our towns and human resources, and try and come up with some solutions to at least recruit better, be more attractive, and retain longer our officers. Okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to the captain.
Yes, please.
Good evening, council members, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thank you.
I think I've had the opportunity of meeting all of you, some very recently, just a few minutes ago. So it's a pleasure. So as a reminder, my name is Hamid Khalili. I'm the captain. Like the chief said, I oversee operations, and I have the pleasure of presenting our 2022 statistics to you. I apologize in advance. It's death by numbers. So I'll try to make this as short and as entertaining as I possibly can. So this slide here is an overview of our calls for service. What is a call for service? A call for service could be anything where a member of the public calls the Central Marin Police Department and asks for service. That ranges from sexual assaults to leaf blowers. And as you can see in 2021, we responded to 33,333 calls for service. That's about I'm sorry, that's a typo there. It should be 2022. That's a 2% decrease from the prior year. And that's really, it's not alarming. It's pretty much par for the course. And I'm sorry, my vision is so bad, I can have a hard time reading this. But ironically, when I first started, typically our Fridays and Saturdays were the busiest days of the week for us. And in 2022, it was Wednesdays. And why that is, I'm not 100% certain. Oh, you are so kind, Rebecca. Thank you. But as you can see, the time of day is what's really interesting, not very interesting, but it peaks during the 9-10 o'clock hour, and then it tapers down in the evening hours. And we, based on what the chief said with our staffing issues, we've tried to do the best we can by addressing our staffing model to coincide with the peak activity time. So the most number of officers we'll have on the streets would be that time period between 10 and 6-ish. And then the pie chart on the bottom left is a breakdown of the calls for service by jurisdiction. And for Corte Madera, there was 8,561 calls for service for about 26% of the overall number. You'll see there's a little purple sliver with 583. Those are calls for service that we could not categorize for any of the 3 jurisdictions. So that might be a call for service to assist CHP on the freeway. That could be traffic stops that the officers eventually make in Santa Fe that originate in Larkspur, Corte Madera, but end in Santa Fe or Mill Valley. This next slide here is a breakdown of the top 10 locations for calls for service. And again, this is not surprising. This is pretty much routine. We see the highest volume of calls for service originating in our retail areas. And the village tends to be and has been for the last several years the busiest location with retail thefts, identity thefts, and whatnot, followed by the town center. And then, believe it or not, we do have a fair share of calls for service at our local high schools. So Redwood High School, Archie Williams. So nothing here is surprising. The chart at the bottom there is a breakdown of the top 10 calls for service types. And as you can see, 5,425 of those calls for service are traffic stops. It's something that we're very cognizant of. In all my years and all the chief's years of doing this, the absolute #1 complaint that we receive from the public is related to general traffic safety. And so we ask our officers to go out there and to do the best they can in combating traffic safety. So, and I'll get to that in a little bit with the slides, but traffic collisions and traffic complaints is where we really focus our efforts. You'll see the #2 is assist medical agency. So that would be assisting the fire department with responding to medical aids. Wireless no duress. What is that? That is 911 cellular calls that come in. And then if you see it, second from the bottom, you see 911 hangups. That would be residential or commercial landline 911s. We do a fair share of audible alarms. We assist the fire department a lot, and we have a lot of parking complaints. But that's just a breakdown of the top 10 calls for service types. Focusing on Corte Madera for calls for service, like I said, 8,561 of those belongs to Corte Madera. And the breakdown is very similar to the overall calls for service type. So #1 for Corte Madera is traffic stops. Our officers are out there doing the best they can by enforcing the traffic laws. We also have assist medical, so responding to medical aids, audible alarms that could be commercial alarms or residential alarms. And then the wireless no duress again is the 911 cellular calls. For whatever reason, the 9 o'clock hour seems to be the busiest hour. And again, Wednesdays seem to be the busiest day of the week for 2022. Shifting gears, focusing on traffic stops, 5,400 traffic stops. That's a 9% increase from the prior year. With staffing, unfortunately, we used to have a fully dedicated traffic unit. And because of staffing issues, we've had to fold most of the traffic unit back into patrol just to augment. And so we really asked our patrol staff to step up and to address the traffic safety. And to their credit, as busy as we are with less staffing, they've really stepped up. And as you can see, it's a 9% increase from the prior year. So that's a testament to the hard work that the men and women of the Central Marin Police Authority do. Traffic stops, we really focus our traffic enforcement in areas where we see the highest number of collisions, followed by the highest volume of complaints. And so as you can see here, East of Francis Drake and Larkspur Landing, if you've ever driven through that corridor in the evening commute, it's a zoo. People violate the law all the time. So we see a high volume of traffic collisions, and our officers go out there and do the best they can and address traffic safety. You'll see Redwood High School, Archie Williams, and you might ask why the high schools? If council recalls, early in the school year, we saw a drastic increase in the number of complaints we received about e-bikes and e-scooters. It is a rampant issue. I don't think it'll be solved just by enforcement, but this presentation shows you that we have been going out there and enforcing it the best we can. The shopping centers, again, that just might be a coding issue with the dispatcher. We don't actually enforce laws inside the specific shopping centers, but around it. And so that's why you see some of the shopping centers there. This is a breakdown of the traffic stops for the entire jurisdiction. You can see for Corte Madera, of the entire share, 1,253 of those belong to Corte Madera. And again, nothing surprising here. We see the highest volume during the morning and evening commutes. And on the bottom right there, you see the breakdown by month. Specific to Corte Madera, you'll see the Corte Madera Town Center, followed by the Village, generates the highest number of traffic stops for us. Again, it's a coding issue. We do our fair share of enforcement around the shopping centers because that's where we see the highest volume of traffic. The 700 block of Tamalpais, and then Nellen and Road Highway tend to be our busier traffic stop locations for Corte Madera. Again, shifting gears, this slide here focuses on the number of reports that we've taken. So what generates a report? A report is any type of official police report that we document. That could be anything from a criminal investigation to a miscellaneous incident report that we take for documentation purposes. And for 2022, we took 2,463 reports. Again, the 7% decrease is not alarming for us. It's just the cost of doing business. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. For Corte Madera, it almost kind of an even split. 31%, 769 of those belong to Corte Madera. And as you can see on the bottom right corner, the number of reports we take by month is pretty steady. You don't see a huge increase or decrease in the number of reports. Report locations. This is where we take the most number of reports. And again, it's not surprising at all to see the shopping centers that generate the most number of crime reports for us. The Village does tend to be number one. It is the busiest shopping center that we have. So we see a lot of retail theft, identity theft at the Village and also at the town center. And you can see Bonner Center, the high school, So nothing really surprising here. I'd like to direct council's attention to this slide here. So this will be the first presentation that we have presented under what we call the new cybers data collection. The federal government in 2022 mandated that all law enforcement agencies report under what we call cybers. It's the California Incident-Based Reporting System. It used to be uniform crime reporting, and now it's totally different. So in the past, and I think for some of the veteran council members, you might recall that we told you that there's going to be some differences in this year's presentation, and I'll highlight some of those differences. Homicides have all stayed the same. Rapes have pretty much stayed steady. Robberies went down for Corte Madera. We went from 5 in 2021 to 3. Aggravated assaults, you'll see an increase. Why? Because cybers defines an aggravated assault different than what the uniform crime reporting system had defined it. So don't be alarmed. We're not seeing a significant increase. It's just in how it's being reported. Burglaries for Corte Madera went from 70 to 103. That is an accurate increase. If council recalls, I think it was late last year, we saw a period of time where we had a drastic increase in the number of residential burglaries. And it was a group that has since subsided, but it was a group that was going around smashing the glass portions of the garage doors and using a tool to go in. And we were getting hit pretty hard with that. And so were most of the agencies in the county. But we did our best by sending out informational public messaging in the hopes to prevent these. And, knock on wood, over the last few months, I have not heard of that, but I think that's what attributes to the increase for Corte Madera. Larceny, another word for theft, did go down, but vehicle theft, a little more than doubled. And that is another issue that we're starting to see. So statewide, we're starting to see over the last few months, a drastic increase in the number of catalytic converter thefts. Coupled with that, we're also seeing a significant increase in the number of car thefts. Unfortunately, due to a variety of reasons, the Auto Theft Task Force in Marin County is being disbanded. I think it's financial and staffing reasons through the sheriff's office. So the number of resources going to that has diminished. So I think in Marin, it's pretty much up to each individual agency to address their auto theft issues. This next slide focuses on drug offenses. You'll see some of those have gone down. Crimes against police, those have gone down. We're kind of past that era of anti-authority, anti-police. So we're starting to see a positive trend in that regard. But the rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. You'll see mental health commitments have gone down. I hope they continue to go down. I'm going to brag a little bit about this slide. You'll see the financial losses per year in 2021, $317,000 in robbery losses. That's the dollar value for the property that was taken in all the robberies. And then also with residential burglaries, it's a decrease of 97%, a decrease of 91%. And that's just because we dominate. I'm kidding. I wish that was true. In 2021, what we noticed was there was an increase in the number of organized retail theft. Those were the crews that were going around hitting the shopping centers. And in one incident at the Real Real in Larkspur, they hit for $500,000. It became such a rampant issue that we had a couple of our retail establishments reach out to us and ask us for visible security. So they pay our overtime rate and ask that we have an officer out there. And I'm sure most of you have seen at the Apple store and Nordstrom's up until a few months ago, we had a visible deterrence out there, and it really, really helped. Most agencies throughout the state have been doing that. And organized retail theft has become so rampant that at the state level, the governor with the CHP has tasked the CHP with putting together a task force. And to their credit, I always thought the CHP just went out there and wrote tickets and towed vehicles, but they actually have done a fantastic job of addressing the large retail theft crews. And I think to date, it's like somewhere around the $20-30 million in seizures, and they busted these crews. So I think that's why you see the decrease in 22, and I'm hoping that trend continues. But 2021 was kind of a lawless year in regards to retail theft. For Corte Madera, the types of reports that we take most often are burglaries. And again, this was that anomalous period where we saw an increase in the residential burgs. Petty theft, grand theft in Corte Madera seems to be very common just because of the shopping centers. Shifting gears, focusing on moving and parking citations, we issued 1,875 moving citations and 3,290 parking citations. Overall, it's a 6% decrease from the prior year, but you can see on this graph here, Corte Madera, there's a breakdown by month. We did 496 moving citations and 397 parking citations. Parking citations for Corte Madera are less than the other jurisdictions just because we don't have time zones. We don't have a downtown area like Larkspur and San Anselmo do that require a lot and constant enforcement. Traffic collisions, 591 collisions in 2022. It's a 20% increase from the prior year. And I attribute that increase to people going back to work. People are getting accustomed to this post-COVID lifestyle, and we're just seeing more vehicular traffic. And anytime you see that, there's going to be an increase in the number of collisions. Typically, we'd like to think with more enforcement, you'll see less collisions. But as you can see, we were doing more enforcement, and we unfortunately saw an increase in traffic collisions. But of that 591, only 194 of those are Corte Madera. And this one is a true even split between Larkspur and San Anselmo and Corte Madera. Again, the shopping centers tend to generate the highest number of collisions. That is not surprising. It's the same as previous years. But what's interesting, and it's important to note for council, with the shopping centers, we don't have the true vehicle on vehicle injury crashes. These are typically private property damage only, and then a vast majority of hit and runs where someone's pulling into a parking spot and they'll bumper tap someone else and then leave. The victim in that case will call us for insurance purposes, and that does generate a collision report. For Corte Madera, no surprise, the shopping centers generate the highest number of collision reports for us. Of all those collision reports, you could see that there's only 4 involving major injuries. In my opinion, 4 doesn't seem like that big of a number, but 4 is still 4 too many. We like to see 0 injuries. 27 minor injuries, and then, like I said, 64 of the 194 are the hit and run property damage only. So those would be your shopping center collisions. And then this last slide is just a summary of everything. Year to year, calls for service of traffic stops or reports, citations, and then collisions and the differences. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Okay, so I'll open it up to the council if any of the council have any questions. Doesn't know? Pat, any questions?
1,000, but I don't know that there's anything pressing for right now. I love that not supposed to make comments yet, but I love that Corte Madera seems to be better drivers than Larkspur and San Anselmo. So
You could phrase that as a
that was
question.
good news. I guess not question.
No, it's fine.
Oh, sorry. I'll say it again on microphone. I was glad to see that Corte Madera tends to be better drivers than either San Anselmo or Larkspur. So way to go, Corte Madera.
All right, Eli.
Thank you, Captain and Chief. That was super helpful. It's always a really helpful kind of snapshot, especially because we hear, as I'm sure you do from residents, I think there's a perception, not just in Corte Madera, but nationwide, that crime is increasing, and it's always helpful to get the statistics and be able to see, to what extent that is backed up by the data, and to what extent, it always feels like it's increasing when it happens to you or your neighbor. And so I think there's an element of that too, where, when these unfortunate things happen to us, it can feel like it's like, the walls are closing in, and that may not actually be what's going on. So I wanted to ask you, the data obviously super helpful. And what do you say when like a resident comes to you and says like, hey, I feel like crime is really increasing? That's my perception. What do you tell them, and how do you kind of help explain, here's the data, here's what we're seeing?
Yeah. There's a couple things what we do. Number one, the media tends to hype crime stats. I don't think they do us any favors as elected officials or as law enforcement. So I always point that out to them. Not everything you see in the media is always 100% accurate, but specific to local issues, we do refer them to our website where we have this presentation just to set them at ease. And like you said, council member, when it happens to you or it happens in your neighborhood, I could see that perception, right? But the reality, the data speaks for itself. And so I always try to do the best I can in alleviating their fears, and let them know that, Marin is for the most part a very safe community, and our communities that we serve are very, very safe. And we do the best we can as law enforcement to address our issues. So just hearing them out.
Yeah, and I think, with the increase of use of social media or Nextdoor, I think it's a good and bad thing, right? It's good because people are more likely to go on there and share their experiences. My home got broken into, my car, my catalytic converter. And it's good because other people read that and they're like aware of it. And they go, I never lock my door. We still get people like that. I haven't locked my door in 40 years, well, why don't you start? But that's, your prerogative. But with that comes, oh my God, I never used to hear about these. And now it seems like it's rampant. I did want to point out, and correct me if I'm wrong, the increase in burglaries from one of 20 or 30, that's a totality of residential and commercial burglaries. So a commercial burglary can be the rock through the window in the middle of the night. It can also be if I bring like a bag lined with foil into Nordstrom's and take the security tag. I shouldn't be telling people how to do this, but no, but that if you enter and you have evidence that you entered the building to commit a felony, you'll get charged with burglary. That counts as a burglary. So I don't know the exact breakdown, but I think there was an increase in residential burglaries. Does that include car too? Yes. So that also includes when your car gets broken into. That's a window smash on a car. So I just don't want people to think there was 100 home break-ins. It's not nearly that high. So if your car is unlocked and someone comes in and takes stuff, that's a vehicle break-in. It's like a misdemeanor. But if they have to force their way in, break glass, it's considered a
That's really helpful insight. Thank you. And then one other question, I really appreciate that you guys are focusing on traffic enforcement, because I feel like one thing that I've been seeing just really dramatically escalate is people driving very poorly. And I feel like I particularly see it with like unsafe lane changes where people don't signal and they end up either merging right into somebody, or somebody else has to swerve into another lane and doesn't have time to check. And, it's just horrible. And I feel like I see that more and more. And I was just curious, and I feel like I see it more, frankly, outside of Corte Madera, especially like on the freeways and stuff. But I was curious, are you guys noticing that trend as well, just in terms of not only more collisions, but in terms of people's behavior on the road?
Yes, I would say people are they tend to drive faster, and we're all in a rush to get to where we need to go. And so that common courtesy of affording your fellow motorist an avenue to change a lane or just drive the speed limit, we're seeing that less and less regularly. And there's a sense of entitlement. How dare you stop me? I wasn't doing anything wrong. But I think in general, we are seeing just a higher number of vehicles on the roadways, and our infrastructure in this county was not designed for the amount of vehicles that are on the road today. And so you combine all that together and you kind of have this perfect recipe, or what we're seeing now, where you're seeing a higher number of collisions because there's more cars on the road. And then you're just seeing just a general poor behavior in people's driving. Right. So yes, 100% see the same thing.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I appreciate the both of you and also your staff for all the work you're doing for our citizens and also for San Selmo and Larkspur. So I think we all appreciate it. So thanks for that. If I can remember on traffic stops, you're collecting other data also that gets submitted, race and that kind of stuff. Do you review that data? Can you just maybe go through that process? What you kind of review, what you're looking for? Maybe you've had any issues at all on a high level?
Yeah, I'll start off, and I'm sure the chief will want to chime in on this too. There's the RIPA Act that was passed, legislation, so statewide, and the RIPA Act is the Racial Identity Profiling Act. And what that requires is every single law enforcement agency to gather some statistical data from every contact. So a contact, according to the law, is traffic stop. If I contact a person on the street for whatever reason, it does not account for a call for service. So if I get dispatched to a domestic violence incident, I don't have to do RIPA entries on the victim and the suspect. So this is mostly, think of it like this: police generated contacts with the public. That'd be the safest way to assume. And the law requires several data points. And I think it's upwards of 56 data points at this current juncture. And those data points could be anything from perceived race, perceived age, perceived disability, language, whether that person is housed or unhoused. And then as the contact develops, so say I contact a person and that person's on probation and I decide I'm going to conduct a probation search. Well, now as a result of that search, there's even more data that has to be collected. It's very time consuming for the officers because every single contact that we conduct, and I've done them, it's from start to finish for just the RIPA entry itself is about 10 minutes. And imagine that the average officer will conduct anywhere from 10 to 15 RIPA entries. On our website, we post quarterly statistics for RIPA. And so what we post is the age, the race, the gender of the person. And so that's all it's up to date every quarter. And then what we're required to do by law is to report it to the Department of Justice in April. So April 1st was the first time that we reported our entire 2022 data. It is something that the chief and I look at very closely to see if there's any concerning trends that we might identify. And it also gives us a really good snapshot into what our officers are out there doing, right? I will tell you, the RIPA, as beneficial as some of the data is, the RIPA program is also flawed to an extent because it takes into account the officer's perception. So we don't have to ask the person what their race was. It's just what I believe your race was at the time of the stop. The other thing that we've seen is it's not a very fair correlation to go, well, Central Marin stops X number of such and such race and such number of such and such race. It is not proportionate to the population of Corte Madera, as an example. What it doesn't take into account is our daytime population in Corte Madera is what, 13,000? But our daytime population with all the businesses and our commercial area is well over 100,000, right? So we see a significant number of vehicles traveling through. And as you saw, people don't drive well, and we tend to stop vehicles for traffic safety violations, right? I've been doing this job for 23 years, and I can tell you that if I'm sitting at an intersection monitoring stop signs and a person blows through a stop sign at 15, 20 miles an hour, I have zero idea what their race was because I'm focused on the violation, right? So I think it's a good program. It has really opened up the eyes of law enforcement officials and the general public. But I caution that sometimes the data can be flawed. It is not a direct proportion of our populations. So we don't deal with just Corte Madera, Larkspur, and San Anselmo populations.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry.
So I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe about 92% of our RIPA data entries are traffic stops. And if anyone ever wanted to go on a ride along, we could show you how a traffic stop works. Stop sign's one thing, but a lot of our stops are speed related. And we use radar or LiDAR, and we're picking up that car anywhere from 100 to 50 yards away. Half our stops occur at night when it's dark out. So I just wanted to reiterate, we really don't know. I can tell you, we each worked traffic for about 10 years before we promoted. And I had no idea until I walked up to the car if I pulled over a 16-year-old, an 80-year-old. I have no idea, But also, if you look at, we just went through the presentation about where we make our stops, right? And did you notice they're all major arteries, right? We're not up in the neighborhoods, and people get mad about that, but we don't have the accidents in the neighborhoods. We make the stops where we have the accidents. The stops, if you think of East Sir Francis Drake, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it gets about, maybe RJ knows. I think it gets, it's Larkspur right now, but it gets upward of over 60,000 cars a day. I think it's actually more like 80,000 cars. Most of those people are not actually residents of Larkspur or Corte Madera. If you think of your town, Tamalpais, I think, is pretty heavily residents, but that Tam overpass, we work that a lot. And do you remember that one offhand? I think it was almost 20,000 a day. So 25,000 cars a day go over that overpass. And I think the population of Corte Madera, I'm going to correct you. He said 12. I think it's more like 9, 10. Okay. So you start to get an idea of the people we're stopping are not really residents. They are sometimes, but not always. They are when we're working the school and the e-bikes and things like that. So there's that aspect to it. We do look at it. I wish we had a consultant or something to look at it more and do more of a statistical deep dive, because I'm not that type of skill set. A lot of us don't, but we do have a big chunks of raw data that we do our best with, but that might be something we look at doing in the future. There's been some talks of maybe doing it countywide and we share, so that we're not bear the brunt of that. But we do our best to look at it. And in its totality, I'd say it's on par with the other agencies I've looked at in the county. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks. And then it may not reflect in the stats, but how do you handle those with mental illness? And then homeless is another side to that also. How do you handle those two?
So I think part of the reason our mental health calls went down is more and more we're using mobile crisis. So we pretty much entirely, is everyone familiar with mobile crisis? So that is, it's a county program that started, I think, a couple of years ago, but it started off kind of small, and it's getting more robust. And it's mental health professionals that you can call if you're a family member. So if you don't want to call 911, and they'll come and help you. They generally only have a team of 2 working in the county at a time, and it was generally kind of like daylight hours. But we always call up there first. And if they're available, we go, great, let us know if you need anything. I'm not sure if that would register as a mental health call for us. It might. Yeah, probably if it came through us, it's still, but maybe that drop off could be, it's getting more and more well known. I know a lot of the schools are now calling them directly as opposed to calling us, and that's great, right? It's a medical problem. It's not a crime, mental health. So we're trained to do it. We're kind of the last line of defense. I think moving forward, that's going to become more robust. There might even be another option to use other medical professionals instead of us, but we're always there to handle it. So that's kind of the mental health aspect. We get training in it, but we're not psychiatrists. We're not social workers. We do our best. Homelessness, we have a HOPE team, homeless outreach team, and they routinely do patrols where they go out, whether it's into the marsh or up into the trees, and we look for people. Generally the people who are without housing that are, out in the open, our patrol officers will just contact them and see what they're doing. We always try and offer assistance first with them, because you're not going to, arrest your way out of that situation. And so there are good services up in San Rafael, and a lot of those services will route them into permanent housing. And that's always our goal, because they do sometimes generate a lot of calls for service, and it's better for everyone if they can get housed, including them, right?
Thanks. I appreciate your approach on this. I just have a couple more. You touched upon e-bikes. Can you just maybe describe some of the issues you're seeing with them? And then how do you handle, I want to say, minors like under the age of 16 or so?
So e-bikes, there's a variety of very convoluted laws that govern e-bikes and scooters. What a lot of people are not aware of is, for certain types of classes of e-bikes, you actually have to have a driver's license for them, because they travel at such high speeds. Part of the problem is the vendors that are selling the e-bikes are just there to turn a profit, right? They just want to sell their product. And so they're not doing a very good job of educating parents on the laws surrounding e-bikes. What we're seeing the biggest issues of is kids riding to and from school, tandem on the wrong side of the road and without helmets. And this morning when I was driving into work, and there was a kid in front of me on his e-bike, and he's driving on the wrong side of the road. He's got his helmet attached to the handlebar, not on his head. And so, you know, it kind of goes back to just the general disregard for the law and just for their own safety. But, you know, we are dealing with kids, right? And so in the beginning of the school year, when we realized how much of a rampant issue this was, we partnered up with our towns, our cities, and asked them to put some newsletter information out there regarding the laws. We partnered up with our schools and asked them to help educate the students, put out newsletters to the parents, letting them know. We went out there for several weeks on this enforcement blitz to stop the kids, but not so much cite them as much as just to educate them in the hopes that that'll combat and curb this. And I'll share just a quick story with you. I went to Archie Williams and I met with the mayor of San Anselmo, the principal of Archie, and we were standing out in the parking lot, and these kids are zipping past me, 2 on a bike, no helmets, and I'm yelling at them to stop, and they're just giving me the bird and driving off. So that's the general attitude that we're dealing with, right? Education will only take us so far, right? I can stop the same kid over and over again. Unless there's some consequence, I don't know that we're going to win this issue. And so at some point we tell our officers like, hey, take the lowest level approach and educate. And if it works, hey, that's a success, right? But if we start noticing that we're stopping the same kids over and over and over again, well, then we have a problem. So we need to send a clearer message. And that's where the enforcement component comes in. We issue them a citation. With juveniles, the good thing is when we issue a juvenile citation, the parent gets notified from the court. So it draws the parents in. And, you know, through the court system, unfortunately, we're seeing, Chief and I were just talking about this today. We're not seeing the level of accountability in the court systems with traffic courts. So, and this is a very arbitrary number I'm going to throw out, but it was like somewhere around 40% of the number of traffic court cases that go before a commissioner are getting thrown out. It's just dismissed in the interest of justice. So, I mean, we can go out there and we can enforce and we can cite, but unless people are actually held accountable for their actions, it's an uphill battle that I don't think we're going to win.
Thanks. And then just one last question, which I like to ask this one every year. What's kind of like, besides recruitment, which I know it's an issue, what's the biggest issue, or what's the thing that kind of keeps you up at night wondering, you know, just kind of out there?
Great question. And I can tell you without a doubt, recruitment and retention are the top issues. Top issues. It keeps me awake. It keeps Chief awake. What we're seeing currently, I have not seen in my 23 years in law enforcement. It's scary. We're lucky to get people to come into the door and apply for positions. And I'll tell you, of the candidates that we're interviewing, the vast majority are not qualified. And so the other aspect of staffing besides recruitment is the retention of the people that we currently do have, right? Housing in Marin is very expensive. And so we're seeing more and more of our officers who are we do a really good job of training these folks, but what they're doing is they're lateraling to agencies closer to home that pay more. And for them, we tend to do exit interviews with all of our employees, and we're finding out that they value their quality of life at home. And so shortening their commutes and being able to spend time with their families, cutting a 2-hour commute every single day out of their life and spending those 2 hours more with their parents or with their children is of value to them. So recruitment and retention, I mean, we're already seeing it. We're folding our traffic unit back into patrol. But then, you know, looking at things more long-term, when we first started at Twin Cities, the average tenure of a patrol officer was about 12 years. It was not at all uncommon to have a patrol officer with 25 years of experience, right? The average tenure of a patrol officer right now at Central Marin is less than 2. And so over the next decade, the damage has already been done, right? You have an influx of very, very young and inexperienced folks. And within the next decade, the chief will be gone, I'll be gone. Probably 3/4 of a command staff will be gone. The supervisors will be gone. So who's going to step in? Will they be prepared to take on these roles? That's what I lose sleep with every single night. So,
Yeah, I mean, I know you said other than recruitment and retention, but I'm gonna just bring that up because that's truly something we haven't faced before. And it started building a few years ago, and COVID and some other issues over the last 3 years have really sped that up. And the problem is it's really statewide, or you can just, it's easier to look at it as a Bay Area issue if you want to just look at it as that. And what we have is, if you look at, when our officers leave, they don't go to other Marin County agencies. That tells you a lot right there. They're going closer to home, or they're going where the pay is substantially higher. And it's a weird anomaly with law enforcement in Marin County, where I think if you look at teachers, they're some of the highest paid in the Bay Area, whereas law enforcement, Marin County is much lower than a Sonoma County, a Solano, a Napa, a San Francisco, Contra Costa, and Alameda. So we're the low part. And what that does is, in years past, when you had 100 applicants, it didn't really matter. Most people, and the gap is widened more too. It's not just being the lowest, it's you have a significant gap. And then what's happened now is those agencies that pay a lot more have, I think Santa Rosa a couple months ago announced they had 26 openings, and they started offering a $30,000 hiring bonus, and they pay significantly more than us. And they started actively reaching out to our employees. So it's really tough. If you think of the private sector, if you had a competing business that was doing that, it's just brutal to try and hang on to people. And the real tough part, as I told you, is we only have, when I say we have 11 people out, I think we only have 4 or 5 openings. But it takes, when one person goes, they give me 2 weeks notice, and they're like, hey, I'm going to Sonoma County Sheriff. I'm like, good for you. I understand. And now it takes me a year to a year and a half to replace that person. And it's just, you just feel like you can never catch up. So that's our fear is, we're kind of on the razor's edge. What happens if we can't get in front of this and stop it somehow, is what do we look like going forward? Because it's not sustainable. You know what I mean? But one thing I did want to clarify, just in case it concerns someone, about our officers working in Apple and Nordstrom. There's some misunderstanding about that. They are not working while they're working for us. That's not like we're assigning them to go stand in front of Apple. That is on their time off, and Apple contracts with us it's an opportunity for them to make more money and get overtime on their time off. And we have several officers that work it routinely. And I'm very glad we have that opportunity, because those technically could be officers who go to other agencies, but it's a win-win for everybody involved. That it's a way to supplement their income.
Okay, thanks. And again, I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. Thanks.
Okay. So I have a few questions. I'm going to take a different tact. What makes you go to bed happy each night? Questions. There's certain calls you think, do you think that there's certain calls that could be reduced in Corte Madera specifically, since you're speaking to the council? If so, what is that only through greater police presence, or are there things that the town could do to reduce calls to help with staffing crunch and other assistance to the police force that the town could provide?
I think that already started a few years ago with your code enforcement. A lot of the parking is actually handled proactively now by your code enforcement officer, which is great. Your code enforcement officer has a pretty big presence in Town Park during certain days. Without them being there, we could get a call for service where it's like, this person has a dog off leash, could you please go handle it? Whereas now code enforcement's handling some of that, or there's a car blocking a hydrant. So that is helpful. I think, if the staffing keeps trending the way it is, I think it's just going to be more of a triage scenario where, if you think about, you saw the calls for service we're handling, a lot of those aren't necessarily threats against people, right? Leaf blowers come to mind. There's a lot of things that are important to people that I understand, but you don't necessarily need a police officer to handle those type of things.
I think our leaf blower is also an ordinance that's handled at least in Corte Madera by that way, and that might be some of the stats. that
Just
we're
depends who
seeing.
they call. So if they call us, generally we'll,
So, but you would answer instead of deferring to?
yeah.
Okay, so
Someone calls us, we handle it.
You,
So,
you have to handle it
Yeah,
by
we
law,
don't-
or you can't defer it based on the triage at the 9/11 level.
we might be able to, it's something I could work with the town manager on. But a lot of, you got to remember that we get calls 24/7.
Understand?
Yeah,
Yeah, and we don't
that's-
have 24/7 response teams. So I appreciate that, but the
Similar to the
dialogue
mental health, yeah.
perhaps. Okay, and you don't have to have the answers to all. My questions are usually ones to think about for longer term, right? So ultimately, the town center and the village, is there other creative strategies that we could do to help reduce calls? I know we have CCTVs and other kind of technology, especially for smash and grabs and hit and runs, where that could be identified at an appropriate time in a consolidated effort in like conjunction with those centers, basically, that could reduce that, but still create a reportable insurance. So could you foresee a program that could kind of reduce the in-person, on-demand presencing of a police
Yeah,
force?
there's a very low tech solution. Your shopping centers do have security. And traditionally, the stores call the police when there's a crime that occurs. If it's a crime where it was a misdemeanor, like a non-felony, we could maybe work out a system, because we have online reporting already. We could work out a system where we filter more of those calls to the security, who then fills out the online report and becomes the RP. Just depends on the call. If it's a felony, we'd still want to go because we do actually catch these people in conjunction with CHP and other agencies. And I mean, a good example is one of our detectives, Detective Charlene Cunningham, played a really integral part. It was in the media a few months ago where CHP's retail theft group made a big hit where they're like, hey, these people were responsible for $1.5 million. They hit stores from Arizona to Washington, California. And she was actually able, through one of ours, to identify one of the people that led to all those arrests. So it's pretty cool. But that's where we need to be involved, and gather evidence and all that.
Yeah. So another one, it was a good segue. The highway patrol ultimately had this one for smash and grabs, but also ultimately we're seeing a uptick in car theft, which to me is also a larger region. Like, they're not dismantling them in Corte Madera as well. So ultimately they're going into the highway system. And so if that crew's so good at busting these larger crime organizations, perhaps there's a need to start discussing that for
I mean,
car
at
theft.
a state level, a lot of these car thefts are actually catalytic converter related, where they take the car and they might drive around the corner, they might drive into another town,
Mhm.
they dump it after they take the catalytic converter.
Is there a task force currently at the state level or at the highway level
I
that is
don't
addressing those
know.
issues?
I think it would be nice for them to address catalytic converter thefts like they do retail, but that's not mine to ask.
Fair, I understand, but if it's affecting us locally and basically we can defer those type of reports to a larger group that's better suited to respond to them, perhaps that's a way to.
I can say with vehicle thefts, the report that we document is actually on a CHP report. So all vehicle thefts do get routed to CHP. I don't think there's a statewide, like there's no focused task force like there is with organized retail theft. And that's just partly because organized retail theft became so rampant and it garnered so much media publicity that our elected officials were forced to do something about it. I don't think we're there with car thefts. Car thefts they've been pretty common for a while. We saw a decrease a few years ago and an increase in cat thefts. And like I said, just recently we started noticing an increase.
Yeah.
And
I had a question more
Please.
for that.
Yeah.
So with those cars, I think it's very specific to what type of cars is it, or is it across the board? I mean, are you looking at like newer cars, electric cars, ones with advanced security systems? Are you looking at, late 90s model Toyotas because they're easily infiltrated and known as basically a target? Like,
it's a great question. When we were on patrol, the 90s Honda Accords, Toyota Camrys, those were the hot ticket items. Now we're seeing a wide range. As technologically advanced as cars are getting, the thieves are usually one step ahead. And so I just saw an article not too long ago where a thief was able to bypass a car security system through the headlights. And so long gone are the days of the shaved keys and the window smashes. They're using electronic means that does not attract public attention, and they're in and they're out. I can't definitively tell you what type of vehicles, like the high volume of certain types of vehicles, but it's the whole gamut. There's just vehicle thefts in general.
I appreciate your answer. The idea of cyber theft of cars is ultimately some new concept for me to digest for a while. So the other one is this concept of parent enforcement. I know that if children misbehave and the parents are aware, are either aware or not, but it's at the home and have parties, we have a certain ordinance. I don't know if that's per town or how that's basically administered, but is that administered through the courts as well? Or is that a different system than the traffic court that would allow a more accountability of especially repeat offenders as a tact to basically address minor abuses of e-bikes and other types of transit?
With the Muni codes, it depends on what the Muni code is, but it can be handled administratively, and they were. But then it became burdensome for the towns and the cities to conduct the hearings and whatnot. And so we kind of shifted away from administrative to more like criminal with certain types of Muni code violations.
Okay.
With the vehicle code and with just traffic court in general, if you're a juvenile, the parent has to be involved. And so there is some level of accountability with the parents. Maybe it's an inconvenience to, bring them from work into the traffic court with the commissioner and have them explain their child's actions. But, I do firmly believe we live in a very affluent community, and, parents have the financial means to provide their children with some of the best, right? With e-bikes are not cheap. They're actually fairly expensive. But we see a higher concentration of kids with e-bikes in Marin than I would venture to say in some of our neighboring counties. But along with that comes the accountability aspect, right?
Right.
And
So I have another question to that also. So it's a traffic violation for speeding or not having a bicycle helmet. Ultimately, if a certain age group child drives another child or a young adult, it's actually, how is that a traffic violation as well? Oh, sorry, Amy.
Yeah, so I'm just going to cut in here because state law pretty much dictates the treatment of juveniles who violate the law.
That's fine. So this one's more about within a car, if you drive another juvenile,
Yes.
it's against the law, correct?
Right.
But on a
if you're
e-bike, if you
provisional-
drive if you basically are having multiple passengers on that e-bike without helmets and endangering another adolescent, is that defined legally? And is that at the state law level?
Yes, it's a bicycle. Bicycles, I'll give you a good example. DUI, most people don't know that. The DUI applies to bicycle as a car. So sometimes people are like, oh, don't worry, I'm riding my bike home. You're like, well, that's not good. Bicycles are under the motor vehicle code and also covered by state law. I know there's some talk in some of the cities about handling some of the e-bike stuff administratively. It's a good legal question.
Yeah, ultimately, I don't know that our council, I personally just, I don't know that we're interested in that, but it is that we have a lot of communication from people to want to find ways to address that. So I get a sense
So I can
that
give
that's
you some
not the way to
background
do
on
it.
the social host ordinance is the party ticket, right?
Yeah.
And those were handled administratively for years. The reason we switched to charging them criminally as infractions and then they go before essentially traffic court was because I think it was a Corte Madera incident, and it ended up it's no big deal when people just come down and pay the ticket, right? But when they go, I'd like to contest this, I'm not happy with this, the town has to put on a hearing, and it ended up costing like a couple $1,000s. And it was, I think it happened twice. And the town was basically like, what are we doing here? And I said, we can handle this and just send it to traffic court. And that's how we've been doing it ever since. So.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to add, with vehicles, if you're a provisional licensee, so you've had your license for a certain period of time or you're a certain age, you're prohibited from having a passenger under the age of 20, I believe. With e-bikes, there's a loophole in the law. There's helmet laws. There's riding on the right side of the road laws. There is no law against riding tandem for an e-bike. That's something I found out in all my research. It's a loophole. I don't like it, but it is legal so long as they're within the speed limit on the right side of the road and both of them are wearing helmets.
All right, but that'll be addressed at the state level if it's determined
It
that
has to
that's a
be.
necessity to look at.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll follow up back to my original question. What makes you go to bed happy each night?
For me,
I want you both to answer.
It's my captain. He makes me happy.
Nice, right? Team
keeps me
camaraderie.
up at night. No, honestly, for me, what makes me happy is knowing that we're out there serving a good purpose. And, in light of everything that you've seen in the media with law enforcement, the negative aspects of law enforcement, that is just it's a fraction of what happens throughout this country, right? I mean, just little old Central Marin, 33,333 calls for service in 2022. That's 33,333 instances where things could have gotten bad and we would have been on national news, but we didn't. And so I have 2 young kids, ages 11 and 9. And the reason I do the commute and the reason I come to work every single day and I grind is so that we can maintain a quality of life for the residents of Corte Madera, Larkspur, and San Anselmo, so they can enjoy the same quality of life in the next 15, 20 years. And against all the odds, the staffing issues, the negative publicity, the scrutiny, at the end of the day, we are what stops the bad people from breaking apart civil society, right? I mean, I sit behind a desk. We sit behind a desk.
No, but so I hear it. You want to go home knowing that you're a hero. You want to go to sleep as a
Not
hero
here,
but
just that we're serving a good purpose.
that's a good
for-
goal though. But like you're heroes. To me, it's heroic what you do and what you do for society, right? I've watched enough movies to know how I define heroes. So
I'll quickly say, for me, it's, every few years, the town goes for different, or one of the cities or towns of ours goes for a tax measure and they do polling. And I think it was maybe 6 months or a year ago, Larkspur did some polling and, Larkspur and Corte Madera, I know everyone feels that they're very different, but they're pretty similar. And it was after George Floyd and, and they were polling what people thought of their local police. And I'm like, oh, this will be great. I can't wait. It actually came back really high. It was like 85% were very supportive. So that makes me happy, is even after some really low parts in this country, people didn't clump us in with all of law enforcement and some of those bad actors in other parts of the country. And they saw us as, sometimes we feel like people only just see the uniform and nothing else, but I think they saw beyond it. And that made me happy. And obviously our councils are all super supportive. Town staff's always supportive. And it makes me happy that the community, for the most part, is very supportive.
great. Thank you. All right. So with that, I'll close council questioning and open it up to public questions. So if there's anyone that would like to speak to this topic, you can have 3 minutes at the dais, or no, I guess the podium. Anyone have anything in? Okay. Is there anyone online?
Have one hand raised by Margaret Andell.
Excellent.
Give me just 1 second. Let me. Margaret, you should be able to speak now.
I have more of a question than a comment. I'm wondering with the problem of you're having trouble filling positions, what the response time for a 911 call is.
Our response times haven't changed. So when we have trouble filling positions, it's not less people on the street. It's just more forced overtime. And we have what's called minimums, and we keep our minimum standards the same regardless of how many we go down. And to do that, we have folded people from traffic in. And occasionally we've also folded people from some of our other specialties. So it's not uncommon if a shift is lean and someone gets sick and someone's on vacation, that like our detectives will put on uniforms and work. The drawback to that is they're not doing their job as detectives while they're there. And that's kind of like traffic. They're not, our traffic response has just not been as strong as it was in years past. But yeah, 911 response times are still the same. I don't have an exact number, but I will tell you it's pretty quick. I can tell you on average, if it's the middle of the night, we usually beat the fire department from anywhere to 5 to 10 minutes if it's like a medical aid. So that's pretty good. If it's a, you know, if you or someone else has stopped breathing, we get there pretty quick. We have AEDs. So, and then for crimes, it just depends. If it's a crime in progress, we'll put our lights on and go code 3. We'll get there real quick. If it's, you know, my identity was stolen and there's a lot of traffic, it might take us 20 minutes to get there because it's not a life or death situation.
Thank you.
And we don't have any additional hands raised from our attendees or emailed public comment.
Okay, great. So with that, I'll close public comment and bring it back for any final statements the council might have about the presentation.
It was a fascinating presentation, and I do like, you know, just putting statistics to the actual experience. And I appreciate your work and presenting to us tonight.
Thank you.
Yep. We're all good. Yeah. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Very much. Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Okay, so that closes item number 3, which was presentation. Moving on to item number 4, which is the consent calendar. The purpose of the consent calendar is to group items together which are routine or have been discussed previously and do not require further discussion. They will be approved by a single motion. Any member of the town council, town staff, or the public may request removal of an item for discussion. Is there anyone on the council that would like to pull an item, staff or the public? Okay, with that, can I get a motion?
So move.
I'll second items 4A through 4C.
Can I get a roll call?
And we did not have public comment on that item, so we will go with Councilmember Casissa.
Yes.
Councilmember Avazio.
Yes.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Mayor Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Okay, so that closes the consent calendar. We have no public hearings. Moving on to item number 6, which is business items. Item 6A is the discussion and possible direction to staff regarding regulation of short-term residential rentals. We have a staff presentation.
Just really quickly, I'll just do a quick introduction. This presentation and item tonight is a follow-up really from our work together with the council during our February workshop, where we initiated a discussion and asked for some direction about next steps with regard to short-term rental policy. As a result of that workshop discussion, we are back here tonight to discuss some policy options and seeking direction from the town council this evening on policy options or policy direction for short-term rentals. With me tonight, I have Bob Brown, who we've worked with in the past on several other policy areas of work, and who has been working on this particular item and policy for the town for, I guess, over a year now. We started the contract, starting with research, and then ultimately I think Bob will go through the process to get to this point. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Bob Brown. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. If I could get the presentation up. Very good. So as this town manager said, we'd love to receive direction from the council on this policy question that you've raised a couple of times in your strategic planning sessions. So tonight, my presentation will briefly touch on how we define and currently regulate short-term rentals in Corte Madera. I'll, for brevity, call them STRs. We'll describe the local market for STRs and then discuss policy options. And we'll also bring in some of the feedback we received from a community-wide survey and workshop we did last June, and also a session we had with the Planning Commission. So very simply, a short-term rental is the rental of a home or a portion thereof for a period of 30 days or less. So the market for short-term rentals has really exploded, of course, as you know, with the advent of these online platforms like Airbnb, VRBO, and there's really literally dozens of them now. So this is really what came about in the past 10 years or thereabouts. But currently in Corte Madera, the zoning code bans short-term rentals. You do allow bed and breakfast inns in the R2 and R3 zones, but not in R1. And the town's approach to enforcement has been like most of your enforcement actions, really in response to complaints, and complaints have been pretty rare. However, despite your ban, I'm sure it's no great surprise to you that people are renting their homes in Corte Madera. We had one of the online monitoring firms check a few times, and they found on average about 30 separate listings. This varies a little bit by season, but roughly in that range. Almost all of these were for single family dwellings, and 83% of those homes were rentals of the entire home, and 17% were rental of a room or a guest cottage, a casita, that kind of. So this slide demonstrates how the jurisdictions in Marin are dealing with STRs. So Corte Madera, as well as Belvedere, Tiburon, Sausalito, and Larkspur, all have a ban on short-term rentals. I don't think any of those jurisdictions actively or proactively enforce, but they do ban them. San Anselmo and Ross are a little unique. They allow them, but really don't have any regulations. And fortunately, they've really had few problems. And then the third category are those jurisdictions that allow them with regulation. And that includes Mill Valley. They've been at about 8 years now. San Rafael, Novato, Marin County, and Fairfax have all adopted ordinances within the past couple of years. And this compares those jurisdictions, and also I threw in Petaluma, in terms of the number of host registrants they have and how much they bring in each year in transit occupancy tax. And there's some striking differences. Those jurisdictions that sort of have a real demand from tourists, like West Marin or even Mill Valley, or larger like San Rafael, see more STR registrations, and as a result, more TOT. Other jurisdictions less. And I think Novato is a interesting example of a cautionary tale, because there they've had some issues with getting registrants, and their costs are exceeding what they bring in terms of transit occupancy tax. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that this is an area of great revenue potential for Corte Madera. Our guess, which really is based on the number of registrants you're likely to have, the number of annual rental days they'll probably rent, and the rental rate, would be in Corte Madera. We think you could probably generate about $16,000 a year in TOT. So that would be enough to cover staff costs and enforcement, but clearly not going to solve any real budget issues. So I think to start a policy discussion, it's really good to take a look at what the objectives are. And for short-term rentals, these could include providing some certainty to homeowners. Right now, again, while the city says that they're banned, if people ask, I think the town staff admits that they only enforce on complaints. So there's a bit of a dichotomy there. So this could provide some additional certainty to individuals. Definitely would want to consider ways to minimize and address potential nuisance impacts, which have been severe in some jurisdictions. You probably want to look at minimizing the effects on the housing supply and the character of neighborhoods. Another potential policy objective would be allowing homeowners to generate some additional revenue. It's particularly important, I think, for younger homeowners that are just trying to get into the market. And again, the town could be interested in some tax generation. And there's also the issue of equity with some of the hotel operators that do have to pay occupancy tax. So when we asked the public about these objectives during our survey and our workshop, the ones that really sort of resonated most with the residents were, again, trying to make sure that party houses didn't occur, that there's a way to reduce some of the nuisance impacts, and also to assure that the housing supply isn't really being negatively affected. So on the bottom line question about whether the town should continue to ban STRs or allow them with appropriate regulations, the responses were pretty mixed. So 47% said to retain the ban, and 53% said to allow them with regulations. And I would mention that the survey done last July, we had 549 responses, which was really a pretty good response rate. The staff really helped get the word out for those. And then we had a session with the planning commission. And again, that was pretty split, although the commission did lean towards continuing the ban. So now we'd like to talk about how you could possibly address some of these concerns with regulatory options. So the first one is, again, the issue on the housing market and community character. And I would just suggest that in terms of a perspective, again, we found about 30 rentals in Corte Madera. That constitutes about 0.7% of the housing stock for single family homes in Corte Madera. So not a lot. Again, Corte Madera is probably not going to be a real tourist mecca that's going to create a huge market for these. But one way to address the concern about homeowners that might, or even corporations that buy homes and turn them into short-term rentals as a business, could be to, as upon registration, review their homeowner exemption on their property tax to make sure that they're only allowed to rent the primary residence and not a second home. Other things that could be done from a regulatory standpoint would be to require owner occupancy during the rental. San Rafael's done that. It's very limiting, of course. Could limit the number of days per year that a home could be rented. And you could even potentially do limitations on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis, although that starts getting pretty granular. On the real issue about potential nuisance impacts or safety impacts, a number of things are possible. A number of cities that have regulated have established limits on occupancy based on number of bedrooms. So again, if there's 30 people in the backyard around a pool, clearly not legal. Some require additional parking. Many require an emergency 24-hour contact that the city would have on record, sometimes even available to neighbors. The posting of guest information. So making sure the guests know who's the emergency contact, what's the phone number for emergency services, how do you evacuate this neighborhood, what day is trash day, those kinds of things could be required to be posted. Some jurisdictions, as part of the registration, require a building inspection, make sure the fire extinguishers are there, the carbon monoxide monitor. Some require a fire inspection. Some of these are done just via photos online. And all of the ones that do have a regulatory aspect have a registration procedure and the ability to revoke in case there are multiple violations. And again, when we did the survey, the things that really rose to the top were establishing guest occupancy limits, providing an emergency 24-hour contact, and requiring a registration process that's revocable. And some of the other higher scoring ones were limiting the number of rental days per year, and requiring the posting of guest information. Those all sort of came up as higher priorities in the survey. So staff, in terms of staff recommendations, if you were to consider an ordinance that regulated, I think staff feels that the regulations that make most sense and could be fairly easily enforced. One would be, again, allowing only the rental of the primary residence, not a second home. Requiring occupancy limits based on bedrooms. Having the 24-hour emergency contact available. Posting guest information on site, And again, you could or might not want to do fire and building inspections. So next steps, tonight, we'd love to get some direction from the council. Either we think it would make sense to continue, if you choose to continue the ban, it probably would make some sense tightening up the zoning ordinance and making it more explicitly illegal to have STR rentals. And possibly initiating some proactive enforcement, which can be done using a consulting firm. They monitor 24/7 the websites, and for a fairly reasonable fee, can provide the actual addresses, owner's name and phone number, et cetera, for your code enforcement to follow up. Or if the council feels that short-term rentals are possible for the town, then we could develop an ordinance fairly easily. And we would love to get any feedback from you about the kinds of regulations you would like incorporated. If you direct the preparation of an ordinance either way, we'll go ahead and finalize that. And of course, then planning commission and council public hearings. So with that, I think the town manager and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, so I'm going to open it up to the council for questions. I'm going to look to Fred to start us off.
Yeah, thanks. This got information overload, but it's all good stuff. Just a couple questions. On the 30 or so that are listed in Corte Madera, do you know how many of those are rooms versus houses?
Yes, 83% of those were rentals of the whole home. 17% were rentals of a room or a guest unit.
Okay. And then do you know if any of the condo, I want to say associations in Corte Madera and the CCNRs, do you know if they prohibit short-term rentals?
I would not know.
Okay. I was just wondering if that cuts down on, again, the stock that would be out there.
Or would they have the legal capacity to do so from Amy? Do you know?
If you put in the CCNRs, I assume you put in the CCNRs and it's in there.
And I think only 1 or 2% of the rentals were in multifamily. So we're really talking mostly single family homes.
Okay. And I guess you can't tell again on the 30 that are rented, how many people are renting those because they're either elderly or they're in a financial situation and they're looking for the extra income type thing.
Don't know the intent.
Okay. All right. Thanks. That's all I have. I may have a couple more, but for now.
Thank you. Just two questions, I think. First, for the 4 jurisdictions other than Corte Madera that currently don't allow short-term rentals, which it looks like is Belvedere, Tiburon, Sausalito, and Larkspur, are they like us in that they're banned because they haven't taken up the issue and they're not explicitly permitted, or have they taken up the issue and made a policy decision to ban them?
I know that Belvedere and has definitely gone through that exercise,
Mhm.
and Larkspur, I think last year had a forum on this. I think that they're working on the policy solutions, but I don't know.
I think both Sausalito and Tiburon went through a process where they actually explicitly developed an ordinance prohibiting short-term rentals in their communities. Obviously, there many tourists are seeking homes there, and I think Larkspur currently, although they did go through a sort of a discussion on this, I think last year, currently is more or less banned because of the permissive zoning ordinance that it's not explicitly allowed, so therefore they interpret it as not being allowed.
Thank you. And then just one other question for now. With regards to very real concerns about potential nuisance behaviors, am I wrong in believing that our entire Muni code and all of the the noise ordinance and everything in there still applies to illegal short-term rentals now, and it would apply to legal short-term rentals if they were legalized, even if we didn't add specific additional new layers of regulation, we would still already have the full force of the Muni code, applying to these short-term rentals. Okay, great. Thank you.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, it looks like Fred has another question.
Yeah, if we continue the ban, I know it's one of the options, continue the ban on short-term rentals, what do we do with the 30 that's out there?
Well, that is one of the questions. If the council was to continue the ban, would you also like to increase the level of proactive enforcement to actually try to deal with the ones that are out there?
I would just comment on that, and I'd say no matter either way, I think we're asking the council for direction on an ordinance one way or the other. So I would like to go forward with an ordinance either way. And with that ordinance, I'm also going to request that we spend some additional funding on consultant, at least being able to identify where those short-term rentals may be in our community. And then, yes, over time and through education, obviously, if they're out there, we would have new rules and regulations in effect, go through the process systematically of ensuring that the rules are being enforced.
Thanks.
So I have just a couple questions moving ahead to what I thought was sort of our general direction at our last workshop on this, that if we would be inclined to allow them with certain regulations, I'm just wondering if staff or Bob could explain why we left out 1B through E. And then also if there's possibilities.
Just clarify what one. B and
Okay,
E
I'm
is
sorry,
for us.
they're in the recommendations of what they would suggest if we were to go ahead with some. I'm trying to move ahead so we can actually
know,
make a
but
decision in a timely manner.
That's
Please let me finish.
answerable.
Okay, so the limit on the times, the extent of the rentals, owner occupancy calendar year cap, they're all listed as options, but not included in the recommendation. I'm just wondering if you could explain why that. And then also, the building fire inspection, I would agree that it shouldn't be included, but I'm wondering if you could answer the question, would it be possible to just require smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors without going to the full-blown police and fire inspection? If we could sort of just add that one point.
I mean, I'll talk to the last point. I mean, anything that requires an inspection, so confirming that there would actually be smoke alarms and whatnot on site is going to be a cost. So that would be added to the whatever fee is charged in order to actually do that work. And so that's one thing to consider. But that's certainly, obviously, there's requirements already in place for those
to
things
be in a house.
house. And
So we can remind them that they're required.
of course, without a physical inspection.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
maybe there's a way to self-certify these things as well.
Yeah.
That we get as part of the application
Just check a
package.
box that, yes, it's there, and
Yes,
So-
you can do that with the party registration to have them sign that they're there and even potentially even include a photograph of them. So the other issues we felt were either more challenging to enforce, like, a maximum number of days per year that could be rented. You need to, keep tabs.
somebody has to keep.
The requirement for an owner to occupy is pretty limiting, particularly if people are going on vacation, want to rent the home for a week while they're away. That precludes that option. So again, we thought, at least initially, if you were going to adopt an ordinance, maybe start out with fewer regulations. And if you find there's problems, you could always increase, but it's usually hard to go back the other way.
Thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate it.
Hi, so I had a question about when the survey was taken. Were participants, did they understand how the ordinance was only being enforced by complaint? Did they know that at the beginning?
I think that we did indicate what the current rules were and how they were being enforced. Yes, as part of a really short background before we asked the policy questions.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking that maybe they're thinking that let's keep things the way they are. So let's vote against, allowing short-term rentals, but the way things are is that it's only enforced by complaint. So the way things are was the way they wanted it to be. As far as questions, I think I don't think I have any more actual questions. I think I'll have more suggestions later. And that was it.
So I have a general question, and this is about life safety, and it's related to the idea of hotel rentals and basically the building code that's applied to a hotel versus what basically a single family home compliance would be. Not that it should be overly restrictive on the individual home, especially because this isn't a full-time, it's a private kind of negotiation, but ultimately in these recommendations of ordinances and in your previous discussions as we move through this, are you considering where this life safety kind of, when you go in for inspections, are there certain things that the hotels might provide to those occupants that short-term rental from a town perspective would want to basically be provided. And this is, I feel like Amy's gonna answer more again, but
Mayor and council members, the short-term rental area is still a relatively new phenomenon. And I think the laws surrounding it is developing as it goes forward. I think there is a balance between allowing residents to make use of their homes in this way, but ensuring that the town does not become liable should something occur. Airbnb, some of these programs, this all happened before there was the idea of sharing your home for money happened before there was any regulations around it. And communities are sort of catching up to figure out what they want in their location and how to make it work. I mean, we've all read the horror stories of the party houses and shootings occurring at party houses, and this is in communities in the Bay Area. So there's definitely some legal issues here that when we get a better focus from what council is asking us to do, that we'll have a chance to evaluate those issues and present that information to council such as it exists. And I think,
fantastic answer.
we're going to see how things progress as home sharing, develops.
Yeah, I think it's an important consideration for the protection of our residents overall and the town. So, yeah, so that was my only question. So with that, if there's no other questions, I'll close questions here and open it up to public. So if there's any comments, you have 3 minutes. You can speak at the podium. So if you'd like to make a comment about the topic, please do so now. Yeah. Make sure it's on. Yeah, I see a green light. Yep,
Where?
it's on. I
It's
see it.
on, green light's on.
Yeah.
I'm a homeowner. I live in Hidden Valley neighborhood in Corte Madera. I'm a block captain leader of an NRG. And I'm here on behalf of the NRG. One of our concerns, since we have several properties that are empty now, and some are owned by adult children where the homeowner is passed and they're considering doing short-term rentals. We are set up to provide emergency support for the neighborhood. We train in first aid. We have earthquake drills. We're now doing fire evacuation drills. And even the long-term renters do not participate in that. They have no stake in building community. So our fear is that with short-term renters, they will not participate, and they in fact may be a danger. Parking problems, evacuation, not knowing how to evacuate, not being willing to learn or assist, with an absentee landlord. Now that's what you're apparently not considering. Right now, you're considering that the homeowner must be present, right?
Not that far.
I think we're considering all options and gonna
Okay,
give
so
direction.
I'm more opposed to where the house will be used by someone who has no stake in the neighborhood in keeping up the property. We do active work because we're a fire zone area. So we do active work in policing our own neighborhood, getting our neighbors to cut the trees, to, have pebbles 3 feet out from the house, all of that. So those are our concerns, that if we do not have good regulations, if we open it up en masse, then we're losing the community support and the community environment that we value living here in Corte Madera. I mean, that's why many of us moved to Corte Madera. And we don't see ourselves as San Francisco, which is a tourist town. And so I want you to take that into consideration, since the town of Corte Madera is sponsoring all our NRGs. asking us to provide this service because you don't have enough police or fire in an emergency to do these things. So please take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak? Great.
Hey, hi, I'm Susan Wolf, and I'm a longtime Corte Madera resident, over 30 years. I live in Chapman Park area, and I do rent my home via Airbnb when I am gone for work or when I'm on vacation. And my neighbors are aware of it. They have never complained. They know they can contact me at any time. Mostly the people that rent my home, it's a group, a family. They're coming to visit other family or a reunion or a special occasion like a wedding, a graduation, something like that. So then it's not a party house. It's not people who are coming to do that. I don't allow parties. I do provide a very comprehensive guidebook that has emergency contact information, evacuation routes, house rules, how to deal with the parking and the garbage. And the parking is not an issue in my home because I have plenty of room in my driveway. So, I don't think there's ever been any complaints in my neighborhood. And the Airbnb income is a huge help for me because it does help with significant property taxes that I have. Plus, living in Chapman Park area, it's been designated a fire danger zone. So my insurance rates have increased phenomenally. So that's a problem. And I spend maintenance, I maintain my house, and the Airbnb income does help me I have a lot of large trees, and I do try to have some come out every year and make the property as fire safe as possible. So I think that's important. But I just, in general, I think the gig economy is here to stay. And I think the best way forward is to find a way to make that work in this community with, Airbnb or short-term rentals. And I know a lot of the communities had a good summary of what other communities have done. And I would definitely be in favor of clear policy with some reasonable regulations that work for everybody. He reiterated that in the report, that I don't really think it impacts the housing market here in Corte Madera like it does in other communities. And so I think that's good to consider. And to your concern, only allowing the primary homeowner to rent your home would mitigate a lot of those concerns. Some say it impacts hotels. Okay, I guess I'm out of time. I'll just say when I travel, I use Airbnb, and I've had wonderful experiences, and I think it can be very positive if it's done correctly.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jim Robinson, 25 Ash Avenue. I've been a homeowner in Corte Madera since 1997. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. I did have the opportunity to attend some of the earlier group discussions we had on the potential of having either a continuation of the ban or some form of allowed STRs in the town of Corte Madera. And my memory of one woman that spoke from my neighborhood, Madera Gardens, mentioned that they had a 3-month newborn. They were in sleep one night, 2 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden HBO came on and blasted 3 or 4 movies until 7 o'clock in the morning. Short-term rental. That's my only experience within my own neighborhood. But I can tell you, as the first speaker said, when you have neighbors, you know the neighbors, and if there's a concern or complaint, you can deal with them one-on-one. And that's what we have done generally. I am one of the 47% that answered the survey that was in favor of extending the current prohibition of short-term residential rentals. This is sort of an outgrowth, I think, of the discussion we had with accessory dwelling units and junior dwelling units. And a lot of people felt like, well, that's an opportunity for us seniors to generate income. But if you look at the survey that was done several years ago by our senior group here in town, 85% of them own their own home, and 77%, I think, said they had no interest at all in renting their home out for income purposes. Now, I recognize there's always going to be exceptions to the case, but I don't see this as a revenue opportunity. I also, having been involved in code enforcement for almost 40 years, I know a lot of times councils adopt ordinances, they expect them to be enforced, but in most cases, they're enforced on a complaint basis. And I think that if we have someone that's in a short-term rental for a weekend, by the time it's addressed, the complaint will be finalized and gone, and the issue that the homeowner had to encounter will have already happened. I think that if you're going to have an ordinance that does prohibit them, I do think there has to be proactive enforcement. I can't imagine what a town would be like, not the town of Corte Madera, but any town in general, if you have ordinances, but there's no enforcement. We have, issues related to graffiti, issues related to parking, traffic, and so on. And I think if you're going to have an ordinance, the town ought to make sure that it gets enforced. I don't think that this opportunity to rent your home for less than 30 days is necessarily something that is of a general good to the total community. It may be of a good to an individual. That's a question that I was always asked by mayors that I work with. How does this benefit the entire community? I don't think this benefits the entire community. I think it only benefits a few. And I think it's going to be very difficult for the town to regulate it. And I think that it should be continued to extend the current prohibition and come up with some ordinance that would help the staff do that, because I think it's going to be difficult to enforce any option that you choose. Thank you.
Hi, council members, Valerie Bishoya, 152 Sandpiper Circle resident. I'm also a serving member of Planning Commissioner, so I will refrain from an opinion and just will provide the comment for consideration. So one thing that is concerning is recycling when there is an ordinance for short-term rental, because there is different people have different habits and they are not aware of the policies that our town is trying to implement. And the second, as Mayor Lee has brought up, is the life safety concern. Speaking of the personal experience, renting Airbnb last week during our vacation, we had a gas leak and we had to call 911. And if we were not by accident heard an alarm that was hidden in a heater room far away from the house, it would have been very sad because the gas leak went into the ventilation system of the house, and there was no one, the owner of the house was not even on the call as well. We dealt with the management company that was doing it. So something to consider for the life safety, because it just personally happened to us. And I'm not sure if the ordinance should be limited to the occupancy types of R1 and R2, or it should be spread out to, other occupancies, but just, again, comment for consideration.
Is there anyone else? Seeing none in the public, is there anyone online that would like to speak?
We have 16 people online and 3 with their hands raised at this time. We'll start with John Hunkiewicz. Sorry if I mispronounced that.
That's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for entertaining my questions and concerns. I can only go off an experience. I also live up in Hidden Valley. There are several homes that have are in. I don't know if they're being sold. I'm not quite sure what's going on with them, but there's 3 very close to me. My first thought would be, if we are to go through with the short-term rentals, another thing I would think of would be how many of the short-term rentals can you have within a certain area, or a certain amount of, within me, hundreds of feet. So that would be one consideration, to say, hey, you can only have so many short-term rentals within a certain area. That's one thought, if that is to go through. My second thing is an experience that I've had, that a homeowner rented, I believe, to a long-term rental tenant. And when that tenant left town for work, he or she then short-term rented the house that he or she was renting. And it became a big nuisance. I mean, there were parties all the time. I had to physically go up there and confront them and say, hey, this is a beautiful neighborhood. I moved here because of it. And we have a very strong community up here. And as soon as the short-term rentals came in, I felt that they were a big intrusion on what we are trying to create and keep up here in Hidden Valley, with this, what our first speaker said about the NRG. The NRG is great. They welcome everybody. And I definitely think that short-term rentals, at least in our close-knit group of families and friends up here in Hidden Valley, it would be a big nuisance. So that's just my experience. And like I said, if we were to go through with something, how many of these short-term rentals can you have? I just think in my situation, I might have 2 or 3 within 600 feet of each other. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have David. David, you should be able to speak. David, if you're there, we cannot hear you. Should be able to unmute. Okay, while we'll come back to David, and we'll go with Margaret.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah,
we
there
can.
we go.
Hello?
Yes.
Try again, David.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So just real quick on the whole rental thing. First of all, thank you, everybody. The first thing is I understand everyone's concerns when it comes to all this stuff, right? I've used Airbnb, and on their platforms, there's specific rules and regulations on their own. So yes, there's always going to be things that fall through the cracks. But one thing that I have found is that if you want to do some kind of regulation, what about, because a lot of people, they use that as they're going out of town, as they're going on vacations, things of that nature. What about having a host? People have hosts or property managers. So for instance, if someone is renting out their home and they're going to Greece for a month, they have a property manager that would be a contact individual or a host that is there. And then as for regulations with fire extinguishers or fire safety, print out a list that needs to be addressed. Gas, water shutoffs. You would talk and walk through the host or the property manager exactly where these situations are, or if there's an emergency evacuation, where you're going to go. I'm sure we've all traveled all over the world, right? And we're not concerned about, well, if there's an emergency, where are we going to go? If there's a major emergency, we're going to get the hell out of the house, right? We're not concerned on that. But I understand the concerns that are coming in. So we could definitely go ahead and walk with our property manager or our host. Hey, this is the list that the town has provided that we should go ahead and follow. I'm in total favor for short-term rentals. I feel like these are our properties. And again, like when it comes to parties and things like that, I mean, if you have a long-term rental or if you're a primary residence, you know that there's regulations and ordinances for noise, ordinances for parties, things like that. Parents have had issues, obviously, right? You go out of town, you have your kids there, and they have a party, and they get notified, the police come, right? Things like that. Things happen through the cracks, but I think we're focusing more on the negative than the positives. The one thing I'm curious about with the council, how many do actually live in Corte Madera? how many actually do own a property, and how can you make these regulations without a vote first from the residents? That's actually a question. I mean, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. Hello?
Answer that?
So ultimately, we can take comment, but we don't provide answers unless staff feels like that they can speak to the
Okay.
question.
Because that's one thing I've always been curious about is that, you know, as residents, we pay the taxes, we hire who's for council, and we're homeowners. But I've always wondered, like, everyone that's on the council, do they even
Yes,
live in Corte
this
Madera?
is Amy Ackerman, the town attorney. Yes, it's a matter of state law that every city council member must live in the jurisdiction in which they serve. So each of the council members are residents of Corte Madera.
But when you say residents, does that mean home ownership as well, or could it be rental?
It is not a requirement to own a property to serve on the city council. You must reside in the jurisdiction, but you are not required to be a property owner because, of course, that would violate discrimination laws.
Okay, so then in these requirements
And each city
ordinances,
council member is required
So
to
ultimately,
file a Form 700 statement of economic interests, which are available from your town clerk, which can tell you about the property and business interests of each council member. So all of that is a matter of public record, and you can access that through the town.
So, sir, you have 3 minutes to make comment on this title. Ultimately, you're asking questions that are not related. And the staff would probably be happy to have a conversation outside of this meeting on daily public hours to discuss any of your concerns or questions. And
well, I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
I appreciate your time.
thank you.
And okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, we have Margaret Bandel.
Good evening again. I have one comment to make that I think no one has mentioned yet. The people in town who have a home and are being disturbed by party houses or garbage on the street or bad parking are actually victims. They're not just homeowners who are being bothered and need to call the police in the middle of the night. They're victims. And the county actually has a victims compensation fund. Is our town willing to do a town compensation fund for people whose sleep is ruined, whose weekend is ruined, whose baby wakes up, whose home is trashed, whose car is smashed in the driveway or whatever else happens? Our town is being victimized sometimes by these short-term rentals. And I think the people that suffer from them should actually get the compensation that the Airbnb host has received. That's my comment. Thank you.
And we have one more hand raised from David Adamo, but before I unmute him, we did receive 2 emailed public comments and they were sent to council earlier today and they are available on the town's website if anyone wanted to take a look. David, I'm going to unmute you now. And whenever you're ready, we'll start the timer.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm curious on if this current policy is based on complaint enforcement. We're getting a lot of comments about complaints, but how many complaints are there in the town of Corte Madera? We have Airbnb'd our home. We're extremely selective. We do it like once a quarter, and we're ending up frequently with, you know, people's parents coming in for Thanksgiving in the neighborhood. And they really appreciate that. We coordinate with our neighbors. We're extremely careful and protective of our home because it's our home, but definitely are in favor of having the option to do that. And I think it's a very responsible way to do it. People keep talking about parties and noise. Well, Airbnb does have, as that previous person mentioned, they have a lot of policies in place against that. Which again is why I came back to what is the actual complaint? How many complaints are there about parties other than what people are hearing in the news in other parts of other cities or whatever? So that's all.
We have one, wait, did he go? Oh, we have a hand raised from someone who already spoke. So that was our last public comment.
Okay. Seeing none in the public, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the dice for final discussion and direction to staff about how to proceed.
Do you
So
want to call on somebody or?
no, I'll just make it a free for though. No, Rosa, go ahead.
Okay, I want to thank everybody who came out and everybody who's online for adding to the discussion. I think that the way I'm seeing this, and as someone who is a frequent user of Airbnbs, full disclosure, I've seen some good practices by Airbnb host, and I would just want to suggest some of those here. Throw some in for consideration.
Yeah. I just want to clarify. Well, no, because we've talked about these for years. Ultimately, we call out one company, but as it was presented,
Yeah.
this is a short-term rental policy for all players. They would have different regulations. And so even if the best of breed, it might be the preferred choice, it doesn't mean that we would be using or enforcing a certain one of these offerings. So in the dialogue, when we talk about it, if we talk about it from an ordinance that is more open, I think that would be better serving
Right,
and
right,
understanding it.
right. And I'll also clarify too, that the hosts have their own stipulations, and that's really what I'm talking about. So thank you. I will be more clear about that. There are some hosts who have ideas in place that are not part of Airbnb, and I think they've been good. And I think that one of them that gets rid of the party house thing is that an Airbnb host that I've used probably 3 or 4 times, has that if you are not part of the rental agreement, you cannot be on the property after 10 p.m. And that, unless you're, my age or older, your parties end a lot later. So I would love to make that as a suggestion if we go forward. Definitely no second homes. So it would have to be a primary residence. If you were using it as an Airbnb, I would suggest that. And then also that there would be the same occupancy tax as if it were a hotel, because most Airbnbs I stayed at, that is the case. Excuse me, am I doing something wrong? Okay. When the lawyer starts whispering, you go, pay attention.
Questions that would be helpful for council to direct. One is whether to allow short-term rentals, and the second is then under what conditions.
Okay. So as we are responding, how specific do you want those conditions to be?
I think your comments are helpful. I think we're assuming with these comments that you're in favor of some regulation on short-term rentals.
Okay, right. If we move forward, certainly limit the number of days in a year. As far as safety, yeah, I think there has to be some kind of safety check, fire, smoke alarms, that sort of thing, carbon monoxide alarms, those sorts of things that are just prudent to have for anyone living in a home. And this double rental item that someone mentioned, that's just absolutely not. You know, that's absolutely not okay. And I don't even know if it's probably not I don't know. We'd have to talk about whether or not if you are a renter, can you then also have, when you're away, have your home as an Airbnb? I mean, I don't know.
It's probably against your lease agreement.
Yeah, well, I used to own rental property in San Francisco. That doesn't stop anybody. Your rental agreement, you know, it's like, well, so, you know, but I think you really want to, we would have to, you know, be clear about enforcing that. The other question though is in enforcing any of this, if it's not cost effective because we're not making that much from TOT, it's like, we have to really kind of question how we want to approach that. And we already have it in place that ADUs aren't going to be rented as well. So I think that I certainly support that. Yeah, so those are my comments for now.
Okay. So as a matter of course, it's been brought to my attention that I may have interrupted you during your discussion. So just from a council level kind of courtesy, did you feel interrupted when you were speaking when I clarified that it's a short-term rental versus a specific policy to a company?
Well, I think it was valuable information and that I needed to be more specific. So,
okay,
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Patricia, would you like to speak?
Yeah, so I agree with the bottom of page 6. First of all, I think we should allow some short-term rentals. I think continuing a ban is hypocritical since we know there's 30 out there that are going on. So are we going to allow those but ban new ones? It just doesn't make sense to not be honest and forthright in our dealings with our community. I think that the recommendations that staff has made with the regulations 1A, 2A, 2C, 2D, and 2D, 2E, as described above, are the right ones to do. And I think you should also, in light of what we've heard from Hidden Valley, add 1C and 1D to make sure that the owner is living in the home is occupied generally by the owner to avoid full-time short-term rentals. So that limiting it to 90 days a year or whatever their break-even point is on profitability, I think you're going to have to create some disincentives to stop the kind of, sort of business making and income, buying multiple properties and so forth and turning it into a career is not what we are trying to accommodate for our residents. And so I do think that C and D should be added. As far as by neighborhood, if I can just finish, I do sympathize with what's happening up in Hidden Valley. And I think some of this is a question for the Marin Tax Assessor's Office, because a lot of these properties are being passed on by parents who pass on to their adult children, and then their adult children are deciding they want to turn them into full-time Airbnbs. Well, if they've accepted the passed on tax basis for that property, it's against the law for them not to live in it. They're required to live in that property in order to have these tax benefits. So, I'll be willing to call the tax assessor's office and tell them to look into vacant properties up in there and find out what's behind, if it's true that they are inherited properties that are protected by the laws that we voted into place, which would make it easier for parents to truly pass properties on to their children. So those are my comments. I think we should do it.
Councilmember, if I may just ask for clarification on what you mentioned 1C, which is owner occupancy, and that provision is specifically about requiring the owner of the home to be present during the rental of the actual home. So I just want to make sure that's what you.
Okay, no, I
okay.
think that I think by owner occupancy, I'm reading that as the owner of the property generally resides in the property and is renting it out while they are not
They're
occupying
the
the
primary
property.
homeowner and that's.
Right, so the San
okay.
Francisco way of limiting entire single family home to owners who reside for at least 275 days a year in the home. So you may rent out your property provided you don't, you're not gone. Oh,
Thank you. Yeah.
yeah, sorry, that, I didn't realize that was a two-part item there.
Clarifications or discussion point?
Yeah, and definitely not number B, because I think it is an entire home that is the, I mean, if my family goes away on vacation and I want to try to offset my cost by renting out my home, I should be able to rent out the entire home, not just, a bedroom. So, yeah. That's where I am. I don't know where everyone else falls, but.
Having a discussion. Eli.
Thanks, Charles. I agree with you, Pat, and I agree with the staff recommendation. I think ultimately what we're looking at here is trying to find an approach that balances what I see as, homeowners' property rights to monetize their home, especially in a place where the cost of living is so high and we have so many residents who are in that really challenging house rich, cash poor situation. I think this can be a great boost for them. We got to balance that with everyone else's right not to be negatively impacted by this. And I think that the proposed regulations put forward by staff, I think, really address that. We have the requirement that it be somebody's primary residence. So we're not talking about if you've got a neighborhood where there's multiple vacant homes, those can't be rented out if they're not primary residences. I think that covers that. I think what staff recommended about having a maximum occupancy in a rented house, I think is really smart. Having an emergency contact, fantastic. I think it can probably just be the registrant that we get straight off their application to make things easy. I think having revocation provisions, if somebody is causing a nuisance, right, and breaking our codes, I think they should absolutely lose their ability to Airbnb their house or short-term rent their house in the future. I think that's only fair for the rest of the community. I think they absolutely need to pay TOT, right, the hotel tax, just like our hotels do. It's not fair to the hotels and it's not fair to the taxpayers if you've got a subset of people who are just not paying that tax. So I think all the staff recommendations are fantastic. With regards to, I mean, it's not in the staff recommendation, which I agree with, and I just wanted to mention the concept of like an extra inspection of some sort. I defer to our attorney if she feels that that's important, but my feeling is like we expect all homes in Corte Madera to be maintained in safe condition, whether or not they're being rented out. So to me, the idea of having like a special additional inspection for short-term rentals, I don't know, it feels like maybe redundant. So those would be my thoughts, but all in all, I just wanted to say, yes, I agree with the staff recommendations. And I also wanted to just commend you guys on the staff report. It is super thorough, super clear, very well written, and really lays out all of the contours of the discussion very clearly. So thank you.
After all, that's a hard act to follow between all of you. I'm good with allowing short-term rentals. I agree with a lot of what the staff is saying, just a few other comments to add. And that is, I don't want to make the process, if we can, which it may wind up being overly bureaucratic for people or overly cumbersome. I don't know how you're going to be able to balance that out with everything that you're going to have in there. I realize that this is not a revenue generator by any means, but it should be enough that we're covering staff time. And I know initially there'd be a ramp up, and then hopefully after that, it'll taper off. I for sure agree that there should be verbiage that can be revoked at any time. If there's one complaint, however that's set up, but I think that shuts the door if there is a party and it causes trouble in the neighborhood, that it's revoked. But I think that verbiage needs to be in there. I don't know if you can do this, but I like it about limiting the number per neighborhood. I know we only have 30 out there, it's a small percentage, but theoretically, that 30, even though we don't have them, we can have 20 in Hidden Valley. And I just don't think we can do that. So I think you may need to take a look at that and see if you can figure that out. I don't know if there's any mention about parking. We should look at parking. To me, it should be off-street parking that eliminates anything from the neighborhood with overcrowding on the streets. One thing on the condos, which I brought before about the CCRs, I don't know if you're going to have to get a copy of the CCRs if somebody applies for this, because I don't know legally how that works. If we're saying the ordinance says you can have one, but if their CCRs say they can't and they go ahead with it anyway, I don't know where that puts the town legally. I think we should shift the responsibility and the liability as much as we can to the homeowner and get the town out of any liability and put the whole burden on the homeowner. On the inspection side, Pat, I think brought up about having a checklist. I would go one step further and almost make it a certification where the homeowner's checking off whatever boxes, but they're also certifying that all that information is true and correct. Again, it's shifting responsibility back to the homeowners. And I don't know if we need to look at that process like on an annual basis, where annually they'll be certifying that smoke alarms are in place. Again, I'll leave it up to staff for that. Because again, I tie it back to the number one issue for me, it's public safety. We have to make sure that that is covered. The other thing we need to look at also is that, I know we have the thing there where you need a contact, but what happens when the person is here and that's the contact? You're not going to be able to get a hold of them. So there has to be somebody locally that the town or whoever can reach out to. And the last piece also, which is not part of the ordinance, but I'd like staff to figure out how you're going to communicate this to Central Marin Police so that they know if they're going on a service call, it's twofold, that if they're going on a service call, that it's a short-term rental, that's part one. And then part two, that that's being communicated back to the town that CMPA had an issue with the short-term rental. Again, it may not be part of the ordinance, but I think that communication piece is important because if there is a party, Central Marin Police is going to be called on it. And if the town doesn't know about it, then it's going to be an issue. But again, overall, I agree with, the staff recommendations. And thanks for all the work.
Okay. Everyone else is so much more intense about this. Ultimately, like I said, I wanted to listen and see the stats of the overall residents because this is much bigger than my own personal kind of ideas about it. So it goes back to this philosophical kind of standpoint that I have, which is the constitutional right of like a private property owner and their ability to basically, generate funds if they feel like they need and can do that, which I would like to support. But to what degree, right? And that's where it's, listening to the residents about the perfect scenarios that we would like to support where they could do that, but still maintain the community that is the value that we all love. It's someone like David that was describing, being very judicious about who he did it for. It was during Thanksgiving. It was for a family. They always come back, right? Like, how can you structure an ordinance ultimately to achieve those goals? I don't know, but when I have used Airbnb for myself in other places, that's exactly what I'm using it for too. And it was a great resource to spend time with family and stuff like that. So really my direction to staff is to try to hit the mark on how we can achieve that effectively, preserve community kind of, consistency, not like basically create a new condition that is not what we understand as Corte Madera, but allow people that feel like they need the extra income to be able to generate that and allow access and flexibility to other neighbors to maybe bring in people and have events and that type of thing. I've heard lots of really good ideas. I think it'll take some time to sift through it, but under that, I think that I could also support and give direction to explore an ordinance that would allow it under those type of conditions. So that's how I personally feel. I don't know if anyone has any more comment about it, but I really feel like all five of us I've heard would like to see a well thought about and successful ordinance attempt on allowing some degree of this. I did want to talk about the limiting. I personally am not in favor of that. We did that for ADUs on Christmas Tree Hill. The only time I would say, like in the fairness of going back to the constitutional rights of basically private property, is that by doing that, he who comes first gets first takings, right? But like, to me, if there's a life safety issue, which there was about total amount of capacity that the Christmas Tree Hill can support for new ADUs, then I could see a reason for limiting the total amount of like peoples and groups in certain areas within town. And so that's how I would approach it just from a land use study. But outside of that, I wouldn't want to do it just because I can't see how you could make that fair to everyone as a first come, first served basis. So I don't know if we need to discuss that anymore. Yeah, so
I just wanted to chime in because I think it speaks to what you just said and also something that both Fred and Bob touched on, which is we're a small town with a small staff and limited resources. And so part of the reason that I'm so supportive of staff's proposal here is because I think it really hits the right balance in terms of hitting all the most important pieces of this that we need to regulate, while allowing us to take a more wait and see approach on some of the other kind of ancillary things that maybe are kind of hypothetical concerns, but we don't, especially based on our past experience, have any reason to believe that they will play out. So as Bob said, right, we can always come back and add more regulations if we're seeing problems. And I think we absolutely should, but I think this speaks to what Charles is saying. To me, like putting restrictions on like, like specific numbers in neighborhoods and stuff, I would be surprised if we end up with a situation where that is a problem. And if it is, we'll regulate it. But if it's not, I think it's a lot of additional tracking for staff to do, to be constantly looking, like, tabulating what addresses are being Airbnb'd at any given time and having to, manage that against quotas. So I agree with Charles's assessment of that particular issue in the greater context of let's keep it, as light touch as we can, at least initially, and then we'll come back and we'll add more layers if we need to. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. The staff, how do you feel? Do you feel you need more
absolutely.
clarifications?
I think there's a lot of great comments made by the council tonight. And I think one of the good things about actually having this wait and see approach to this point is that, a lot of other ordinances are out there with which to sort of, see how they played out in other communities and see which ones we can pick and choose from and be really thoughtful about this and try to also, I fully appreciate the comments about staff time and resources. And so we're going to have to think about a program and how we consider all of the those comments and considerations into an ordinance. And so I think we're prepared to do that. And I don't, like I said, because of all the information out there and other ordinances out there, I think we can do it in relatively short order. And I would hope to just build on this momentum and come back relatively soon.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I guess we'll close item 6A. And we'll move on to item 6B, which is the consideration and possible authorization for an additional $225,000 in construction contingency for audio, video, and security systems, and authorization to the Director of Public Works to execute contract addendums to increase service with CAP Architect for architectural and engineering and construction, and MAC 5 for construction management of not to exceed amounts of $102,183. Staff report.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Lee and members of the council. So we are about 1 year into our Corte Madera Town Hall project and things are moving along. As mentioned, there are a couple action items to kind of keep things going forward with respect to professional services and also some remaining scope items that need to be addressed, in particular the audio, video, and security systems. So at this point in time, we're requesting an additional contingency of $225,000 for that item. But as presentation goes on, we'll explain kind of where that money's coming from and how it's not necessarily a additional cost to the town based on prior funds that were set aside. Next slide, please. Oh, I got it. So here's a quick review of where we were in the last year plus. The final design for the project was approved in June of 21. We opened bids for the project in March of 2022. And at that time, the engineer's estimate was $11.4 million base bid plus $240,000, which was an alternate to include solar and battery backups. We had a low bidder, Alton Construction, who came in at $10.485 million plus $335 for the solar and battery backup at a combined total of $10.82 million. So about $600,000 below that engineer's estimate. And that was awarded by council on April 4th of 2022. So over the past year, there have been a number of unforeseen conditions. This isn't necessarily uncommon per se for a project of this scale and type, but there were some unique challenges. The old building that was constructed circa 1910 had some additional abatement that wasn't picked up in that initial abatement inspection work. In the soils, there was some aerially deposited lead, which is kind of common of just car oil and other things. It's common to find that in a roadway in a lot of situations. So we've been managing that. What is good and bad is there was this deficient retaining wall under the building that really did not have a structural footing below. So it's actually, in a lot of ways, a relief that we're not moving forward with that as part of the future building. And it's also great that the building held up and didn't have any sort of major failure. But as a result, we've had to scramble a lot and do a lot of additional this redesign work and shuffling of things in construction. That really is kind of the biggest thing that has led to additional costs in this project, because it really just from that item, it flowed outward because we were redesigning the retaining wall that held up structural steel fabrication and that whole design element. So we ended up with about a 3-month delay on that aspect alone. These are contractors working, multiple people full-time on this project. And so, their time is also part of that cost to manage all of those changes and modifications. Plus our own design team, who is also going through all of those, we call them requests for information. So, at this current time, we're, in excess of 200 RFIs, we call them, going over various details. So very time consuming, but again, not completely out of the norm for a project of this style. We also had to do some additional shoring as a result, because we did eventually remove that old wall and had previously planned to use it in the new design, but by removing it, that made the slope steeper. So then we had to put some temporary shoring to protect the red oak tree that's on the corner of Willow and Tamalpais. So again, those just kind of an update on what we've been dealing with. Also, some of the subsurface bedrock conditions were pretty variable. In design, we took 3 borings, which are, we drilled down and measure the rock depth and various strata at 3 locations. But even by using that and creating kind of a underground projection of what we would expect once we're doing the drilling of all the piles, it was still pretty variable. So that led to some things as well. So the construction contingency has been able to absorb all of those items to date, and that's not necessarily an issue, but again, it has led to additional design and construction management. And so that's one of the action items today, is to provide additional scope for that time that's been spent, and plus the delays that have caused for the construction schedule, about 3 months. And then on the construction contingency side, at the onset of the project, we had not included a lot of the audio, video, and really kind of state-of-the-art security systems, and had considered doing that as part of a separate design contract bid effort. But really, through discussions with the team and the subs, it really makes sense to do that as one. This is one project integrated, and we feel like we're getting value by some of the options that we can do with this contractor. No, a few more slides. Sorry. Here's just the revised schedule. Just we're looking at a. Oh, sorry. Keep forgetting which one I'm looking at. Sorry. Oh, apologies. Okay. Yeah, so this is the previous slide, itemizing the various things. In a nutshell, we're looking at a current completion date of end of December. And, there'll have to be some time for staff transitions from this building to that building, but hopefully grand opening in February or March of next year.
Is that late December 2023?
Yes, sorry.
Okay,
typo.
thank you. Just
Yeah.
making sure we didn't just add on another year.
Yes, good catch. Considered putting January 1, but okay. Next slide, please. So really the nuts and bolts of the discussion today really does revolve around the fiscal impact. And so one of the key things here is because we didn't include the audio, video, and also furniture and some of the town equipment upgrades in that original contract, and we would like to include them in now. We had set aside previously $1 million in the town's equipment and technology fund for earmarked for this project for those aspects. The one or the two items that we're not going to be addressing and we'll leave in that fund is the furniture and the town equipment. So if you go down to below the two clusters of numbers, you'll see we're going to leave, we're recommending to leave $488,560 in that fund for the furniture and technology, which talking with our consultant of that's a reasonable number for a building of this size based on recent projects they've done. But otherwise, we're recommending a transfer of $225,000 from that fund to project fund for AV and security. Be aware that the combined cost for those two items, we estimate closer to $375,000. So the construction contingency previously approved will cover the other portion of that. So we're saying we still have some contingency left. And we don't need the full 375 to be transferred. And then separately on the design or architecture and engineering services side, an additional $102,740. A lot of that was additional structural work. A lot of that's the 3 months of additional time. There may have been some additional sub work working through some of the AV and other security systems. And then also on the construction management side, very similar. They also, in addition to those, they also had to take on a commissioning agent, which is a required process for a building above 10,000 square feet, which really just ensures that all of the aspects of the building are going to work together and seamlessly. So for all those, this is the fiscal input and recommended approvals. And with that, I can answer any questions you have.
Excellent. Thank you, RJ. So I'll bring it to the dice and start with Pat.
Ooh, I got called on. I was asleep. No. I can, I'm not supposed to make comments, so I will hold those for later. My question is, moving forward, looking at the architectural services and interior design, I know furniture selection, colors, finishes, all really important stuff. How have we budgeted for the professional assistance I hope we're getting to make sure we do a really good job with all of that?
Yeah, good question. So we did execute a $61,000 contract with Mac 5, who is also the construction management company, but they have the expertise within their company to also help us through that process. So we've had some meetings, and we'll be also working to select a vendor who will then bring different styles and types of furniture for us to look at and kind of sift through and just really walk us through that whole process. Yeah.
And will that be a public process?
So you can purchase those through a cooperative such as a Sourcewell or whatnot, where it's not a public bid. We are not currently.
I'll interrupt myself, or no, I'll interrupt RJ. I mean, the process of choosing the interior design, finishes, the look, the really important, as a home builder, I know that the devil's in the details and the devil's in the finishes, and homeowners end up being their own design consultant a lot of times, and it doesn't always work. And so I'm hoping that we have professional assistance here in terms of interior design, and that it's a fully vetted public process.
So we don't currently have that as a public process. We absolutely have designers. We have a architect who, basically this is what they do for a living. We are at a point where we probably have to make decisions here in the next 6 weeks to keep on schedule, maybe 8 weeks. We're hearing that procurement of these items is roughly 8 months. So, to do a 6-month public process, it would prevent us from moving into the building.
Yeah, I
And
don't
a
think
lot
you
of,
need a 6-month public
Yeah.
process. I think just a normal presentation as any, the town of Corte Madera is the owner of this building and you are our design consultant. So I think there should be a presentation at some point. Here are the colors we're choosing. Here's the materials on the floors. Here's the furniture style. We've got a great mid-century modern exterior. I want to make sure we are proud of what we end up with. And I know we're in the question
Right,
section.
but we can definitely talk as a council about those kinds of
Okay.
things.
Yeah, thanks.
sure, we can, I guess, dialogue about that more. I think a lot of that was wrapped into the planning process. I know it focused on exterior, but there was a whole material board and concept board and a lot of that has been discussed once. I'm not saying it's.
Yeah, we'll
doesn't-
talk about it as
yeah.
a council.
Okay. Yeah.
Don't answer it.
Any other questions?
That's all.
Okay. Eli.
Sure, thank you.
2 questions. So where does the original construction contingency stand right now? So I know we're talking about, it was 1.08 million or something. We're talking about using 150,000 for part of these that was going towards the security systems and AV. Where does the rest of that contingency stand?
Yeah, currently, we've approved roughly $625,000 in additional funds.
Okay. And then related question, so there's like three expenses that we're being asked to approve tonight. One is additional contingency for AV and security. And then the other 2 are contracts for services that kind of stemmed from unforeseen conditions being discovered, right? Should those, instead of coming out of the technology fund, should those be coming out of the construction contingency?
On one hand, the work to date is the most prone to unforeseen conditions. So that's the good news. But it is still construction. Things happen. We don't know. And so this number, this taking of 225,000 is what I'm hoping is the amount that we need to get to the finish line without $1 more. And I would hope that also at the end, my goal is to return several $100,000 back, but really just trying to be efficient about coming to council and asking for the money we need and not having to come back multiple times and slow down any process on the construction side. So for that reason, I don't know that we can, I think we need, on one hand, and I'm sorry if I'm not answering it in the exact way that you phrase it. I think we need to leave the 488,000 in the technology fund to cover furniture and staff computers. And thus, the only other option would be to draw more money from a different fund. I think the 225 additional to cover the components that weren't in the original contract is an appropriate number that we need.
Okay. I think I understand. So you're basically saying what you're trying to do strategically is essentially preserve the contingency in case more things come up. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? No, Rosa.
Just had weak in my old age. I just had a question about the extra costs that you mentioned under time. So that's time that is salaries to the contractor, or is that staff time as well?
So there's 2 parts, right? There's the consultants that we've hired to do the design and construction management. So they often will say, they're going to put someone full-time on the project for 90% of it. And then they might do half-time on either end for startup and closeout. So it covers that. And then separately on contractor side, they've got a trailer. They're putting, they have 3 full-time people as well that are just working through the design. So it's common in this industry for them to do what's called compensable delays, where they get a certain amount of overhead associated with time delays that are out of their control.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's
And I don't have any questions. So I will close questioning at the dais and open it up to public comment. Is there anyone in the public that would like to comment? Yep.
I'm, as a workplace designer, Pat has touched on, sensitive topics here. So I definitely can comment on first thing on the budget for the furniture and AV systems. Seems too low for the commercial grade furniture. Just in general, just something to keep into consideration. I also would second Pat that it should be a public process because again, designers not just picking the carpet and paints, but also looking at the occupancy and also looking at the dimensioning within the rooms as well. And it's extremely important to have a professional directing the design of the interior. And also the materials that will be selected should incentivize the building health in the future, right? And also the employees that are going to be working there. So I know we're not probably going for the lead or well building standards, but considering the employees who are going to be working there, health of the materials is extremely important. So there should be a commercial regulated standard that will be applied to the selection of the materials.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to comment in person? Seeing none, is there anyone online that would like to speak to this item?
We only have 3 attendees and we do not have any hands raised. And we didn't receive any emailed public comment for this item.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the dais for final discussion. And we're looking at the end to approve the item as requested.
I already made my comments during
Right,
question
so
time,
let's-
so I'll abstain for
Well,
now.
no, I mean, that's great. So let's talk about it because there's a lot of different, there was other comment, right? There's a lot of different ways that we could approach materiality. So in full disclosure, I was asked to look at them from an interior standpoint, but I did not do it based on what colors or experiences they were. It's because I'm an SFO designer by trade at the airport and it's high impact finishes. So it was just like, what is this from a civil building? I've designed them before. So it was just kind of a cursory review in case I saw something that wasn't there, right? But in that process, there's also this discussion about how it reads as a Corte Madera civic building and how we as a council or a people's basically want to be represented and experience this building from the interior. And I think that's really more what Trisha's speaking to. And I think that I think that we can have a dialogue and quickly, like without really knowing what all that is, just allowing kind of a exposure to that and a discussion publicly, not a long drawn out process where it's fully decided because it already has a palm set, but also there's a risk because it's been publicly bid already and they've already come in and the contract, like are those things already bought out? Like it's in the process. What do we actually have available for comment, and does that put us at risk for change orders and other things? And so that's where we should look to staff to see where we're at. And you're new to the council, so unfortunately maybe it could have been brought up earlier and it's still something we can explore, but there are I'd like to understand the risk of basically opening that up. If there's anybody else that also wants to talk about that subject before we let staff respond to it. Yes, please.
I would say that I'm in favor of leaving it to professionals. I have to be honest. I don't think that it will be a short process if you open it up, and I don't think it would necessarily result in a better result. And that's my view.
And I would concur as long as there is, as our lovely planning commissioner and workplace design expert said, as long as there is a professional directing the design of the interior. And I mean a design professional. I mean, I know we're great. We do great teamwork as a community, but in order to not just spread the blame if it goes bad, but make sure that we're truly representing what the community wants to see. And I know there were some material boards presented early, and it was before I got on the council, but I've been paying attention to this process since the beginning. And I just want, we did a great job of vetting the exterior. I'm just calling for one meeting to show what's planned for the interior, including furnishings and finishes. I don't think that's too much to ask as representing the community, which is the owner of this new town hall. We want to see what it's going to be before it happens.
Yeah, I can agree with what Pat and Rosa are saying, and I would agree with Pat also. I think all you need to do is, I'm making it sound really simple, is do a workshop. Like a workshop one night and go, hey, these are the interior finishes that we're looking at doing, and take that approach on it. So you're just keeping it simple. I don't want to hold up the process. And I think we start holding public meetings on what people want to see, what it's going to look like, or not what it's going to look like, what kind of materials. I think it's going to delay the project, which is what we don't want to do. And like Charles was saying, I don't want to get into change orders also, because it's going to drive the cost up. But I think we just did something simple as a workshop, just to kind of show residents, this is kind of what it's going to look like. And even if the consulting can go one step further, if they could do like renderings, like inside renderings, so people can get a visualization instead of just going, here's the color of the wall, you're just showing, a little color swatch.
Or even just photographic
just-
examples,
I would just keep it simple, but
Especially
it still
drawings.
involves the public.
So I think as we consider that, we need to ask RJ if that was included already, or if that would be additional cost, and what that would be, and whether we're really, like the ask is, there's going to be different costs to certain levels. And so, and so I think we also need to consider that and hear from staff before we make final direction about the level of that kind of interaction, if it's possible. And I also think, Eli, if you
Agree. And if I could just say, I think this is a slightly different topic than what we're being asked to approve tonight. So I'm wondering how far we're wandering off the agenda and whether.
right. Well, so
okay.
ultimately you brought it up. So,
I know. But now that we're getting
right.
into it.
So, but the thing is you have brought it up. So Amy, do you want to speak to this as far as like whether we can even actually discuss this?
Maybe let me just tie it in. Potentially, and the question I would have for council is, I'm hearing potentially a interior designer in addition to our architecture team, and that would be possible under the architect contract. So there is some relevance there to today's discussion.
Okay. All right. Thank you for helping create an envelope in which we can have a healthy discussion about how to lead our
Nice job.
town.
Tie it
So,
in there nicely.
all right, Eli.
Yeah, I think, if we can get some kind of interiors package just out publicly, that would be great. I'm kind of agnostic on what the format is, whether it's a workshop or just, putting it out there or something. My understanding is that Ron Cappy, as an architect and as an, having an architecture firm that's doing this project for us, has designed us a whole building, including the interiors, and has, specified materials and all that, and may, I don't know, but may even have an interior unit in his firm that's doing the interiors for this project. So I'm not too concerned. I feel better knowing that Charles has had his eyes on it. But my thought is just, if we can just get it out there publicly, fantastic. But, I wouldn't want to hold up the project over this unless there's like a glaring issue.
Yeah, ultimately, from a design standpoint, I didn't quite look at it where I chose colors. It was more like, does it have baseboard? Is the baseboard durable enough to take, the kind of public abuse that you would find in a, like that's the level of cursory review that I was asked as a civil servant.
And that's a
to
very
basically
important
look at.
level of review.
People, I mean, I think we're hearing, the council and sort of some of the concern about just making sure that there's a preview of what this is going to look like from the inside. And so I think RJ and I will speak about how best to do that. And I'm assuming we're talking really what's most important. And the council chambers, we're talking about the lobby, the public spaces, not necessarily the downstairs office spaces, because I think once you open up, there's more materials. I mean, it expands into a lot of different things once you get throughout the entire buildings. The exteriors we've already spoken to, and you have renderings. So we're really, and I certainly, we all want to be very proud of this council chambers and the entire experience through the building and what that feels like, how we all, as members of the community and public and staff, experience that. And so we are thinking through, I mean, I just want to commend RJ and his team and his leadership on sort of bringing forth all the right questions as I sit on, the discussions that we have with Mac 5 and the contractor, and even, I mean, the small thing like bringing AV, the discussion about AV and security systems into this at the right point, so that we are, these obviously as we get closer to the completion date, more and more details are coming up. And so I think just also RJ's leadership on that, I think, is to be commended. And yet there are going to be these valid questions about how do we make sure that we're going to get it right at the end of the day and that people feel good about it. So
yeah, and in general, I think, ultimately, if the exterior reflects the civic nature of the building from the exterior, also in the interior, it's the look and feel, and it's a congruent design too. So I think there's just kind of, in a way, maybe it isn't feedback, but it's just a validation that what we saw from the outside is the experience and civic kind of like definition of Corte Madera from the interior. And we haven't seen that as a council, or maybe even the public as a whole yet. So it could just be a preview without like basically not in a workshop format, perhaps. But if it's successful, why would there need to be a workshop? Like ultimately, if it defines the.
I'm not asking for a workshop. I'm asking to know that there is a design professional on board and that there's communication to the community ahead of time. Everything from the furniture styles to the carpets to the walls. This is a public building, and I think we need to involve the public by way of the council and maybe by way of the planning commission with our wonderful new workplace designer on the planning commission. I think we have ample resources. I don't think we should need to pay any more big money. But I think we need to make sure that this is being led and guided by a design professional, interior design professional. It just seems really silly to spend this kind of money with that kind of risk. I've seen projects go wrong because we all mean well. And I think we need a design professional on board. I don't care whether we do workshop or whatever.
Yes, please.
The issue though is that, we've all done projects at our homes, and between a husband and a wife, they can't agree on what color or what,
Yeah.
So the idea of bringing all these people in, I think then it's taking it out of the hand of the professional and putting it in the hands of everybody with an opinion. So
Right now I understand, sorry, right now I understand there's an ad hoc committee that is making these decisions, and they are doing it without the guidance of a professional. I think that we're in risky territory.
I am gonna cut off the discussion here. We are very, very far afield from the agenda item. I think staff has heard your concerns and will consult and provide you with some information about.
I'd like to. Sorry, can I just say one thing? With that being said, can I go ahead and make a motion to authorize the additional 225,000 construction contingency for audiovisual and security systems, and authorize the Director of Public Works to execute contracted addendums to increase services with CAP architects for architectural and engineering and construction, MAC 5 for construction management, not to exceed 102,740 and 183,700 respectively.
Second.
May I jump in, please? I think if you would like us to explore including an interior designer, I'd like to add some fee for that. Because it's not currently in the CAPI services that we have.
I'm not prepared to speak to that because I haven't had time to review it.
Yeah, come back on that.
We have a motion on the floor.
Well, no, I mean, staff will come up with a way to address your concerns. And so let them, okay, you don't because you keep bringing it up. So,
I just keep hearing that it's not.
you're interrupting
important
me
and it's-
now. So
Sorry,
I'm trying to conduct town business about moving this forward. So
as am I.
no, you're not. It's been clear by council that you are not.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Excuse me?
I'm sorry, we have a motion and there's a second.
Maybe a member of council.
Yes. Can we have a vote, please?
Okay, so I got a motion made by Councilmember Casissa, and I heard Vice Mayor Beckman second. Okay, Councilmember Casissa.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Beckman.
Yes.
Mayor Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Okay, so with that, we'll close the business items and we'll move to number 7, which is the council reports. Town manager report.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted very quickly to let the council know about our housing element process. We actually had I think as the council knows, our second round of revisions, or our first round of revisions, went to HCD. It's under a 60-day review. We had a preview with HCD today of their comments on our housing element, the revised housing element, and I have to say that they are fairly straightforward, or I should say very straightforward, and pretty targeted and relatively minimal. So I think we will expect to get our formal letter from HCD on Friday, which is the 60-day review. And then we will have, we have to post it for about 10 days, but I think within 2 weeks, we'll be sending it back to them. And we were told that they don't expect to take the full 60 days to review and hopefully get our certification letter from HCD, in which case we can then start to schedule meetings in front of the Planning Commission, then ultimately the council for adoption of our housing element and safety element. So I'm looking forward very much to seeing really the end of the process and really what I think will be a very successful process at the end of the day. So that's all I have to report this evening.
Okay, town council reports. I'll look this direction.
Thanks. This is easy. I attended the MC Homeless Committee, which was last Thursday. It's a reboot because they hadn't met in, I think, about 2 years. I think we're going to start meeting monthly. So more to come on that. Thanks.
I attended a CMSA meeting last week, not too much to report out of that. MCE is coming up this Thursday. The Marin County Fire Department conducted a controlled burn on Ring Mountain today, which I went and visited. It was really fascinating to see. And I'm glad they're doing that work to help mitigate fire hazard. And I just wanted to congratulate Adam on the incredible news that he just shared. I am talking with my colleagues in other cities in Marin about housing elements, and they cannot believe where is at in this process. So I'm really proud of you and your staff. You guys have done an amazing job on this. So thank you. I know we're not at the finish line yet, but just the fact that, the comments that we've gotten are so totally straightforward, like that speaks volumes. So congratulations.
It's broken. It's not me. Okay, there we go. So I attended the Marin Healthy Youth meeting this week. It was both Pat and I attended, and Pat wants to do the report.
I didn't want to do the report. Is that all you have?
That's all I want to say. Yeah, go ahead.
Turn on your mic.
Yes, just a couple things to report. Rosa and I did attend the Marin Healthy Youth Partnership, which actually started as a Twin Cities organization to change the norms with substance abuse in Marin, which we know is at a record. We actually are number one when it comes to alcohol and drug consumption among our teenagers. And so this group is proposing an ordinance, a countywide ordinance, and are asking for cities to also pass ordinances that will close a loophole that is allowing the marketing of psychoactive, high THC hemp products. And because they're hemp and they're not cannabis, they're being slid in underneath the door, if you will, at our own Union 76 gas station in Corte Madera. And so we were kind of called out on that there was a couple places in San Rafael, but in Corte Madera, they are selling these. We've had people go in and ask and talk to managers, and they say it's totally within the law, but they're candy flavored and really targeted at our youth. So as soon as they said they were going to send me a draft of the ordinance, and I will just forward it to Adam and you as soon as it comes in. I have some other things along that same area, but I will save it for later. And I think that's it, other than I am heading to Denver on Tuesday to talk to the State Department about our need to have some money to deal with climate change. So fun.
I have nothing to report from this previous 2 weeks, but I will be attending a few events which were broadcast, which is this weekend for the new recycling containers. There was children painting, so we'll be speaking to that, and it's a really good event on Earth Day. And then also there was an event for youth and wanting to get involved in governance, and that'll be at the Marin Civic Center. There'll be a discussion, so that'll both be on Sunday, and the information's on the website. And we'll also be having a Dennis Rodoni, town manager, mayor discussion on Friday, 3:00 at Cafe Verde, where any and all topics can be talked about. So I'll close town council reports with that, and open up the discussion of the draft agenda for upcoming town council meeting. Is there anybody that has any comments on it? Okay, so I think we're good on that. So we can close that. So we'll adjourn the town meeting and move on to the sanitary district meeting. Okay. Calling to order the sanitary district number 2, a subsidiary district of the town of Corte Madera, regular meeting for Tuesday, April 18th, 2023, starting at 9:27. So can we get a call to order, roll call?
Board Member Casissa.
Yes.
Board Member Ravazio.
Yes.
Board Member Thomas.
Yes.
Vice President Beckman.
Here.
President Lee.
Here. We've already saluted the flag, so we'll open it up for the open time for public comment. Is there anyone in the public that would like to make a comment that is not related to any of the agenda items? Seeing none, is there any online?
We do not have any hands raised or emailed public comment.
Okay, so we'll close public comment, and seeing no presentations, move on to the consent calendar. Is there anyone at the dais that would like to pull one of the consent items? Anyone, staff or in the public? Anyone online? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve consent items 4A and 4B.
Second.
Okay, call for vote.
Board Member Casissa.
Yes.
Board Member Ravazio.
Yes.
Board Member Thomas.
Yes.
Vice President Beckman.
Yes.
President Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Okay, so with that, we'll close the consent calendar. Seeing no public hearings or business items, we can move to the district manager and board reports. RJ, do you have anything?
Nothing to report.
Okay, nothing to report. Board members, anything to report? Seeing nothing to report. Discussion of the draft agenda for upcoming board meeting. Anyone have any issues with the agenda or anything they'd like to add? Seeing none, I'll close that and adjournment.